All right, doing a sound check. You guys should be able to hear me. We'll go ahead and switch over to here so that we're not sitting over there too long. So what are we doing today? This is my talk on breaking into tech. So this thing will go. And I'm going to be working on this as a workshop with the Professional Linux Users Group in 2 weekends. So I'm just kind of getting on here now and practicing through this talk that I've done. My name is Scott Champagne. Some of you guys know me on here as Het Tanis. And the date is August, although the presentation will be, I think, September 5th. So if anybody wants to come and do this as a workshop with me, you can. But obviously, we're also going to have this recorded so that you guys can watch this at your leisure. I think this thing's about 80 slides, so we'll see how it goes. I expect this to take about 4 hours, so feel free to take breaks if you want to work through this with us. All right, so let me get back over here. What are we doing? Well, a little bit about me. I'm a guy that does Linux for fun and profit. I run the Professional Linux Users Group. I've been doing that for about 12 years, and I've been doing Linux for about 25 professionally, right? I've worked on hundreds of thousands of Linux systems, and some of them have still worked when I was done with them. And then I've been teaching others how technology works for a long time, right? I've been on the internet since '93, so I've been, kind of around doing this stuff even since I was a kid. And then I've been formally teaching this stuff for 18 years now. So that's a little bit about me if anybody cares about, how long I've been in IT or what I've been doing. All right, so the purpose of this talk, right? What do I want people to get out of this? Like, what's your high six things that we're going to do here? But a lot of people, they come to me or my students or people that hang out with me in the Professional Linux User Group, like, what do they want to do? Well, they want to get into tech, right? And this is kind of my formal breakdown of the ways that I think you can start to move towards tech. Now, we've had criticisms over the years of, there's no way to get into tech right now. It's impossible. And yet I keep seeing people getting into tech. So it's one of these things where, yes, there's challenges. Yes, this is difficult. I'm not telling you this is going to be the easiest thing ever. I just think these are the areas that you can start to gradually improve so that if you're going to move towards a tech role, you can do it. All right. So let's get that out of the way, because people tend to say, like, oh, you're not being realistic. I'm not saying 100% of people are going to move into tech tomorrow. I'm telling you, you can move into this. It's just going to take you some time. All right, enough with the negativity. We're going to start with a self-assessment. I think before you go into any role or anything that you want to do, one of the most important things is to kind of be honest about what you want to do and what you're good at. If you can be honest about that, then you can kind of pick. Everybody tells me they want to be a hacker, man, but it's like, but hacking is a subset of engineering. There's other things that have to happen here, right? Like, people don't just go and hack all day. They have to write documents and reports and all these other things. So a self-assessment is more about like what you actually want to do and what you want to get out of your career and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to show you guys some ways that I think that you can go through a self-assessment, right? Then we're going to talk about learning Linux, which I think there's all kinds of resources online, or whatever tech you want to get into. Let's say you don't want to do Linux specifically, you want to do security or networking or something like that. I'm going to try to give you guys as much as you can about learning that stuff. All right. Then we're going to talk about like what the day job looks like. If you're in an IT operations department, these are the things that you're going to do. This is what's going to happen. It's not going to be everything, but it's going to show you a lot of the stuff that you run into from an operations side. There's also like the back end engineering. There's also architecture. There's all kinds of things that happen, but generally IT looks a certain way across multiple businesses and platforms. Why do companies run IT departments when, they could just outsource it? Well, there's reasons for it, right? So we're going to get into all that. Then we're going to talk about how I think you should put together a resume, right? I mean, you need to present yourself to the industry in a certain way. And there's formal ways to do that. There's ways that people think are better than others, and I'm just going to give you some resources to look at that. I have my ways that I think that it should go, and I'll give you guys a little bit on that. But really, this is something you kind of have to figure out and work through, and I'm going to show you ways I think to get better at that process. I think you need to practice interview skills. You need to understand the technology, right? You need to understand how to troubleshoot it and how to build it and those kind of things. That's all going to be back here. But then practicing the interview skills, you need to be able to speak about it in a way that convinces somebody else that they should give you the role, of administrator of a system. They've got a running operating system out there doing something. They've got some IT department, whatever, and they want to hand you over the reins to run it, maybe overnight or something like that. And you need to be able to convince them in typically a 30 or a 60-minute interview that you're the right person for the job. So there's a lot of things that I think that you can do to make your interviewing skills better. And then where I think you should look for jobs, I got a lot of criticism where within our Discord, I'm constantly posting jobs from people that I know that are looking for engineers and architects and other stuff like that. And then I hear, well, you're not putting any entry level jobs out there on the Discord. Well, entry level jobs tend to be the ones where you get into the industry. So a lot of times those are going to be local to you. They're going to be school districts or governments and people who need these kind of things locally. So I'm going to show you how I would apply for jobs if I was looking for entry level stuff. And again, as you say, well, Scott, what's your qualifications? You've been in the industry for 25 years. You're not looking for entry level work. But the answer to that is I am always looking for entry level work because I'm constantly looking at the job market for my students, right? I'm constantly looking at what's out there, what kind of things people are asking for, what's the common denominator of things that students need to know, that kind of stuff. So I'm constantly looking for jobs, even though I'm not actually in the market for a new job. I'm constantly looking for entry-level jobs. So I think that the things that I'm going to show you guys there will hopefully help in that way a little bit. All right, so the methodology of this talk, right, to simulate real-world environments and practices around AI, right? This is a thing that's coming. This is a thing that is going to be a big part of IT for you guys. I don't think anybody is getting into a role nowadays where somebody's not going to ask you a question around these topics. So this workshop is going to be kind of interactive. I want you to go, when we do this in 2 weeks, I'm going to, it's going to be very prescriptive. You're going to do this. For now, if you want to do this along with me, you're going to go pick an AI tool of your choice. I don't care which one you pick. I know Gemini's free. I think most of those other ones are pretty free. So you're going to go get one of those. You're going to get a prompt open. If you don't know how to do that, it's going to look kind of like this. I'm just going to go to like gemini.google.com, something like this. And it's just going to say, where do we start? Right. And I'm just going to, as we go to some of these different parts, I'm going to be putting questions in here so that this thing can act kind of like a little study buddy with me. This is going to be off to the side and I can kind of talk to this thing or interact with it in some way, much like college students would get into like study groups with other people of like-minded interest and other people that are going to be taking the same tests and going through the same endeavors and that kind of stuff. You're kind of use this as your little buddy for that kind of stuff. And we're going to prime some topics with AI usage, right? So also when we do this as a more formal thing, this is just kind of us doing it on a stream here, which I'm not trying to ignore people's chat. I'm just I'm clocking that you guys are here, and then I'm kind of going on. But yeah, if people have specific questions, feel free to let me know, and I'll stop. When we do this in 2 weeks, we're going to have group discussions, so we're going to be talking in the Discord. I'll use lectures. I'm going to do that anyways, which is kind of what I'm doing now. And then you will be developing a plan of action moving forward. I'm very interested in 2 things as far as this slide goes. You've got some AI, something that you can use to go reference things that I say or do, where you're like, I don't know what he's talking about. He's talking about the rule of least privilege, and I've heard that before, but what the heck is that? And then you go throw it in your notes to look at later, or you throw it in that AI and you get a better description of kind of what's going on. Okay, so that's the thing. 2 things: get an AI open of some type and take notes. Right? Anything worth remembering is worth writing down. So if you say, hey Scott, I do think I want to try to get into tech, and I do want to try to do some of the things, maybe not all the things that I say to do. I'm not trying to be in some ways, I'm not trying to be prescriptive that this is the only way to do this. I'm trying to show you guys ways to move towards a goal, right? And I think generally, whether or not tech is the way you want to go, or whether or not this is the exact methodology you want to use, I do think this will move you towards tech if that's kind of a goal of yours. So, okay. So enough backpedaling on that. Our methodology is we're going to acknowledge that AI is a real thing. We're going to acknowledge AI as part of our job, and we're going to use it as a kind of study buddy for this set of lectures and or workshops, if you want to think of it like that. If you guys are watching this live, or if you're watching it later, you guys can always pause this at certain sections to go do some of the things that I have, because I have some slides that are pretty busy, and you're going to go through and do those things. All right. So that's our methodology. So the first part of this, the very first of those 6 sections was self-assessment. You need to know what you want to do, right? And there's a lot of ways to do self-assessments in this world. I'm going to show you guys the way that I like to show it to the Professional Linux Users Group and the way that I think that you should do it. But to kind of get you thinking about it, when we talk about self-assessments and what do you want to do, Dave Chappelle said it best long ago. Somebody asked him in an interview on the Dave Chappelle show. He said, "Why do you want to work for us?" And he had all these other ideas in his head, but he said, "I'm broke." Right? Like at the end of the day, we want to work because we want to eat, right? So a self-assessment is about what we want to do, but also hopefully what we can get paid for. So there's a really awesome. It's the next slide. So maybe I should switch the order of my slides. But this is the first. This is the first of 6 AI little activities that we have. And if you want to go through it, the first AI activity of the day is you're going to pull out your little AI and put it off to the side, kind of like I might do with my little Google Gemini here, right? And I'm going to move this off up to the side like this. And I'm going to say, what is, so I go here, ask your AI about the following discussion topics, going down the rabbit hole anywhere you find new terms or topics that you're unaware of. Take notes. So as you're doing these things and you're like, hey, I did a self-assessment matrix and it mentioned these 3 things and I really don't know what a SMART goal is, or I don't really know what these other things are, then you're going to go read about them. Now I have these ones here that you should be prompted on and doing, but I want you to also think as you find different topics that come up to go do that. So as an example, if I were to do this, I would say, what is a self-assessment matrix, right? And this thing's going to go out and it's going to give me some answers from the internet. I mean, Google Gemini isn't much different than what Google would typically do for you, right? Structured evaluation tool. So it's some type of way that we can take what might otherwise be subjective and turn it objective, right? Subjective is, oh, I feel that this is good, or I feel that that's bad. Well, that's wonderful, but that doesn't get any real engineering done. Objective is the idea that we can take these things and weigh them in a measurable way and determine which way is actually best to do something. Don't worry, we're going to make that a little more clear in a second, but they're saying it's a structured evaluation tool. Awesome. Typically formatted as a grid or a table. I'm going to use a table. So, there's a table in this. And then here's some components, right? Maybe what you're competent at, maybe what you want to do, and they give you a bunch of information here, and they talk about maybe how competent you are in these different areas, and then where you might use it. And they give you this idea. One thing I don't mention here is a gap analysis. Well, what the heck's a gap analysis? Well, a gap is between where you are now and where you want to go. We do it often in business. Like we want to have this service for doing this type of thing, this business process, and we don't know how to get there. So where are we at now? Well, we have a bunch of business processes and we have a bunch of that data, but we need to get over there. We need to do a gap analysis and figure out how to bridge what our current capabilities are and what we want to do, right? So gap analyses can be for people, or they can be for processes and business activities and those kind of things. You might use it for a performance review to see, in this case, you're doing a performance review of maybe your life and how much you fit into the tech world. I'm not currently doing tech, but I would like to do tech. So here's a performance review. I'm not doing all the things I want to do. And then maybe for training or mentorship, it's going to be for us directing learning resources precisely where improvement is needed. That's really important. And I talk about it in here. Let's say you really, really want to do Linux and you feel like you're not very good at Linux. Well, that's where you need to spend a lot of time then. But if you're like me and you're okay at database, like I'm okay at databases, I'm not great at them, but I have no desire to be any better at databases. Well, why should I go spend a bunch of time there? That's not the work I want to do. That's not what I'm good at. That's not what I plan to be paid for. There's all these things that it's not. So I know that's not where I'm going to go use my resources. You only have so much time in the day, right? You only have, this is a finite resource, your time and your attention. They're very finite. So directing learning resources precisely where improvement is needed, that's very important. So this is why, as you see this is why I'm using an AI tool with this, is because it can go find other useful things for me around a self-assessment matrix. So now I know these other things that I could go read about or study and that kind of stuff. We should also know what a SWOT analysis is, right? So you're going to read about that a little bit. You're going to figure out what SMART goals are, right? What does it mean to set a goal to be smart, as opposed to just setting a goal, right? There's a difference. Like, we come over here and we say, what are SMART goals? This is very important, right? This is very, very important if you want to get better at doing things. Here's your very specific. They are a 5-part goals. They're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. If your goals aren't any of those things, you're probably never going to achieve them. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that, but if this is news to you, I'm sorry that I'm knocking the wind out of you and telling you that you've been doing stuff wrong. But if you tell me, I want to be better at doing the stuff that I do, and I'm like, well, what the fuck is that? It's not very specific, right? It's not very specific. It's not measurable, because we definitely can't measure that you're better than what you are at something that's so generic, like breathing. I mean, I guess we're going to keep breathing as long as we do. Is it achievable, right? Well, some people, they want to get their doctorate in under 4 years, but they haven't done any school yet. Well, doctorates take a little longer typically, right? So is it relevant? Is it relevant to what you want to do? This is the same idea as earlier. Like, everybody thinks they want to do security, and that's cool, right? Security is a great path in your career, but maybe you're really actually interested in getting down in the weeds of Linux and understanding how to keep systems running, which is kind of what I do. And it's not super relevant to me. Like, I'll go and study security stuff because that is part of my job, but that's not super relevant to me if I'm trying to get better in one certain area. So your SMART goals are very important, right? They're very important to understand. They're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Time-bound's also very important, right? Because I know people, and I'm not trying to call anybody out here. I'm not using any names, but I know people who have been wanting to get into tech for like 15 years. But like wanting to get into tech and actually doing something time bound to say, hey, I will know how to do this by the end of 3 months or 6 months. I will know what I'm going to do, and then build towards it and either accomplish or fail that goal and then move on to some other goal. That helps. That really does help, rather than being like, well, I'll get better at Linux someday. Well, someday's probably never going to come, and then you're going to be at the end of your career and you're never going to have gotten into it. We've got to make these things time bound. We have to have a amount of time. One of our guys on our server who's gotten a bunch of AWS certifications over the year, he's very good about this. He studies to a point. He gets to about 80% of where he thinks he's ready, and then he just sets the time to go take the test about 2 weeks out, because then he forces himself to finish his studying and get into the thing. If you don't set your goals to be time bound, I'll just go ahead and say it like this: you might as well not even have goals. That's all there is to that. But anyways, so SMART goals, and then maybe you ask your thing, what's Linux security, networking, job activities? What are those job activities looking like out in the field? Like, what do I need to know? Are those things that I'm interested in? So like a Linux engineer spends 8 to 10 hours a day looking at a black terminal with white or green letters. They do 2 things at the command line. They set values and they check values. Those are the only 2 things we do at the command line. Command line is a lot like just playing a game of ping pong with a server. You're asking it something and it's receiving information back, right? You're putting standard in, you're getting standard out, or error. Those are the only things you do at a terminal, right? There's nothing else you do if you think about it. So what if you look at that and you go, I don't want to do that all day. That sounds terrible. And I tell you guys, sometimes I have college students that come to me and we're 300, 400 level networking course or something, and they'll be like, when do I get past this? And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is the job. You're in your 4th year of college and you're finding out that the job that you've been training for is something you hate to do. I would rather find that out now for free on the internet, guys. I tell people that all the time. I'd rather find it out for free right here. No, I don't want to be a database guy. Databases sound great for other people, but not for me. And that's actually how my career's gone. Like, I've looked at database stuff over the years and been like, nah, I'll let somebody else solve that stuff. I'm not interested in that. And then what is Ikigai, right? And this is something that you guys can look up on your own, but it's also going to be on the next slide. But then when we do this as a discussion, after we do 10 minutes of kind of people doing the directed study, I'm not going to talk nearly as much in the workshop as I just did there, until we get down to our discussions, and then we're going to work through all of these and see what people found. So this is a good time, if you're watching this later, to pause and say, okay, I'm going to go put all of these in. I'm going to clock that I know what's going on here, and then continue on with the video or whatever. So this is what Ikigai is. It's a Japanese concept, I believe. Like 99% sure of that's what it is. And it's this idea that you should find out what you love to do. You should find out what the world needs, what you're good at, and what you can be paid for. And, that's super simple. I'll just have this accomplished thing. But then you look at it and you go, no, Scott, this is the worst advice, because this is a platitude. This is just, oh, wherever you go, there you are, right? This doesn't help me any. No, you're right, this doesn't. This is the goal. This is what we're using a self-assessment to shape. What do we want to do? Like, what can I sit and do for 8 to 10 hours a day, maybe even 12 hours a day or longer, depending on the type of engineering you get into? And what are you good at? Are you good at the thing that you want to be good at? Or do you maybe need to adjust and go, all right, yeah, I thought cybersecurity was my thing, but then when I saw that when I get into it, I'm going to be doing a bunch of just checklists and not actually fixing stuff. No, I do want to go over here and be in the Linux side of things, because Linux engineers actually get to fix things. Okay, that's where I want to spend my career. Or no, I really like networking. I love watching packets fly around the network. I'm gonna go do that, right? But the point is, you look at this and you say, what do I want to do, right? What's my goal? But now the next part of this is going to be how we actually accomplish, how we actually figure this out, right? Because some people, this is going to come naturally to, right? And then some people are going to go, well, Scott, that's great, but I've been trying to think about that my whole life and it never got me there. Okay. So this is where we back up and we say, all right, here's our process, right? We're going to do a self-assessment, right? And what's the self-assessment? Like, what kind of work provides deep satisfaction? What are these things that we want to do? Right? This is my way of looking at self-assessments. And some of you are going to be like, Scott, these are recycled slides from other slides you've given before. It's true, they are, right? I don't have a whole bunch of original thoughts. I just try to keep things around that work. So here's our methodology for our self-assessment. We're going to have a purpose. We want to determine our skills and our skill gaps. Okay. Then we're also going to align our skills and our interests. So our skills and our skill gaps are going to show, what do I think I'm good at and what do I think I'm weak at? That's going to be our skills. Then our interests are going to be over the same topics, but if they don't align, kind of like we saw earlier with those goals, we're going to say, you know what, they don't align, but I'm not interested in getting any better at that, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time with that. You'll see what I mean here in a second, but just remember, that's what we're kind of doing here. We're going to try to determine what we're good at. And by the way, nobody can do this next part for you. You can't throw this in an AI tool. You can't go pay some consultant a bunch of money to help you with this. Yeah, maybe somebody can help you with it, but at the end of the day, you're the one who has to do your self-assessment. So, this is one of those things where, turn off this video and go somewhere else and watch infotainment if you're not interested in doing this process. Because again, this kind of where it stops for some people, where it's like, well, I'm just not going to do that. Okay, well, I can't help you then. I can't drag you kicking and screaming into something you don't want to do, and you're going to find that's true of most things in life. So the scope, I'm going to only ask you questions around your current technical skills and current technical interests. And then I've got a second one that's like a smaller version of it, where you can do business skills and business interests. But, if you're planning on doing IT operations and you don't want to manage people, which I don't want to manage people. I've got enough of that with my college students, right? I don't want to manage people in the enterprise. I want to stay on the technical side. So maybe this is the only one that's relevant to you, but I'm going to give you all of them so that you guys can work through them. What's out of scope is I originally did this for a team that I was working with at a college a few years back on a HPC cluster. The team needs isn't very important. We're not worried about how you fit into an IT team. This is just for you. And then any external assessments, we're not really worried about for this part of it. And our methodology is we're going to objectively determine your skills and interests, right? Well, and within whatever levels of honesty you give to yourself, because again, you're not turning this into me. This is for you. And then all the questions are going to be normalized to a 50 or 100 point template, depending on how many questions we have. And then you're going to answer how well you think you do something, and then how well you or how interested you are in that thing, right? This is a quantitative assessment then. So, obviously you're kind of figuring out where you think you are on these things, but at the end of the day, you're going to be able to figure out how well you think you do things, and then how interested you are in getting better of those things, right? And then the control, the same questions are asked of all individuals. Don't worry about that. This would be if we were doing this against a larger group. So here's the first part, right? So this is a technical self-assessment, kind of like your AI just told you. You would come in here and you would figure out how well you think you do Linux. And I'm going to go ahead and stop everybody right here real quick and say, if you go down this and you put a 10 all the way down, you're like, I'm a 10 at everything. Well, congratulations. You don't need me. I couldn't help you anyways, right? You're the smartest guy in the room. We can't help you. But if you're honest with yourself, because again, this is just for you. You're not turning this into me. where do you think you fall on this, right? And this is not an exhaustive list. You can take things away, you could add things to this, but this is how well you think you do any of these things, right? And you might say, well, what's a 10? Well, 10 would be like you do it perfectly all the time. And maybe a low would be like, hey, I don't really know how to do any of that, but I want to get better at it, right? Well, we'll talk about what you want here in a second, but this is your skill level. So you come in here, you assign some numbers, and you figure out where you are up and down this list. Okay, this is the first part of your skill assessment. If you need to pause the video or if you need to come back later and look at this, remember in 2 weeks we're doing this as a workshop in the Discord. I'm just kind of working through and practicing my talk now. Then you're going to do the interest. So this is the same slide, but it's how interested you are. So maybe you were like a 5 on Linux, but your interest in Linux is really low. You don't really want to do that stuff. And I say, fair enough. But maybe you had yourself at like a 3 on security, but your interest is really high in security. Well, now we're directing down to exactly where we're going to spend our time. If you took nothing else away from this, but you found out what you thought you were good at and maybe acknowledged that you weren't good at, and then you went to your interests and said, but these are the things I want to be better at. If nothing else, this eliminates that noise where you're like, I'm not really interested in cloud or database or Kubernetes. Those things are fine. Okay, whatever. I'll move them off to the side. I really want to focus on this networking and security. Okay, now you've cleared out some of that noise around how we're going to move forward with the rest of this, right? So your technical self-assessment is your interests around that, right? Then there's some business skill. And again, not everybody wants to do management, but you probably want to at least acknowledge where you are with some of these things, right? Vendor interactions, very important skill in the industry, especially if you're an engineer and you have to work trouble tickets or cases with a vendor that supplies something to your organization. A lot of times you have to lean on their engineering team for kind of a deeper understanding of how certain things work, right? Like if you're not in the business of building drivers, right, on the Linux side, sometimes you have to lean into their team to get the newer version of a thing or find out when some edge case that you guys are hitting is going to be fixed within the tool. So vendor interaction is very important, but not always if you're not management. But typically, as you get further in your engineering role, you're going to deal more and more with vendors. But then your interests, maybe you say up and down the board, I'm not interested in any of this stuff. Well, then you wouldn't spend any time with it, right? So this is your way of kind of assessing your skill and interest around both technology and then also maybe some business stuff. And again, feel free to add other stuff that's interesting to you in there. And that is the start of a self-assessment where we can start to direct down what we're interested in doing and where we should go spend our time. Now, the next one that you kind of have to look at as far as getting better at like assessing where you're at in the industry and where the industry is a SWOT analysis. Now, businesses do these all the time, but I think a person should also do them. There's the strength and weaknesses, which is considered the internal part of it. And then there's the external, which are the opportunities and threats. And your strengths are like, what are you good at? Some of you are really good at reading. Some of you are really good at watching videos on 2x speed on YouTube, and you can kind of do that in the background while you do other things. Well, maybe some of those videos, instead of being like Mr. Beast or Mr. Ballin, are more AWS reInvent because you want to hear how AWS is doing, cloud, or maybe you want to go watch some security podcasts and not just the entertaining ones, the ones that are actually talking about the technology. Because guys, there's people all over talking about like the current events and stuff, but they're not really teaching you anything, right? Sometimes you want to go and see the breakdowns of things and this kind of stuff. So you go find things that aren't just infotainment, they're actually teaching you something. But anyways, the point is your strengths are, what do you excel at? If you can really lean in and look at a Linux terminal like this all day, right? If you can just look at Linux all day, cool. Not everybody can do that. Some people look at that and go, oh man, that would be the worst thing ever to just be stuck down there. Some of us, like for me, I 100% consider a command terminal all day. I don't have to have nothing else going on. I do like noise in the background, but I don't need it. And then, but how do you like to learn? Do you like to read things? Do you like to, again, listen to podcasts or something like that? What's your attention span? But that's maybe a strength of yours. Right? What are you good at? Like the Johari window. I'm not sure what that is, but I'll look that up. Actually, here, this is what we were saying. This is why we've got this little bot up, right? This is so we can say that's probably a study thing that I don't know. Right? This thing will go tell me what that is. Look at that. I like that. I like that. I'm gonna have to look into that. That's really cool. But guys, this is why I'm telling you, have your little thing open, have your little AI or whatever open. I like that. Okay, weaknesses, things you don't do well. You should acknowledge. I mean, we don't have to focus on like, oh, I've got this bum left arm, so I'm not really good at this type of sport, and I can't throw with my left arm or whatever. You don't have to You don't have to live your life thinking about the thing you're weak at, but you should acknowledge it, right? There's things that you may work on but never master. I realized very early on that while I like coding and while I can put together scripts and stuff, I did not want to sit all day and look at lines of code and make sure that all my stuff executes. I did not want to be a software engineer. I knew that. I knew that very early on in my career. But can I write stuff? Can I do my Bash scripts and Python scripts and stuff like that? Absolutely, yeah, sure. But I never wanted to be mainly because of an attention span problem, but also I just never really interested to me looking at that same terminal that I was just looking at earlier, but doing it for software. Never really interested in me. Well, that's a weakness of mine, right? And I can just say, oh, well, it's a preference. Well, it's also a weakness. I can't just sit there and chew on the same function for hours and hours. That's not a thing that I like to do. So that's a weakness of mine, right? But if that's something that's really good for you, that moves into your strength category, and that's what you go lean into, right? Then there's external things, and this is something I've been criticized on, where it's like, Scott, you tell everybody they can get into tech, but it's hard in tech right now. Guys, I'm not saying it's not hard to get into tech. I'm saying you've got to work on getting towards tech if you want to get into tech. You can't just be like, well, it's hard to do, so I'll just keep working at the car wash. There's no shame in working at the car wash, but maybe if you want to go do more, you're gonna go work on some of these things. So, anyways, opportunities. What courses are out there that you can take? What people can you get involved with that are talking, the kind of things that you want to talk and get into? We're gonna get more into that later. What are the market needs, right? Everybody thinks they want to get into cybersecurity entry level roles, and it's like cybersecurity entry level roles are probably one of the most rare things in the world. Most people that jump over into cybersecurity have been doing tech in some way for like 8 to 10 years, often. So the market might not need that, but the market might need very much network operations and security operations teams. So when we get down into that part later, this is good to acknowledge now, but there are certain things that people want to do that just aren't going to be there. You're not just going to jump into a senior database analyst role. It's just not going to happen. You got to come in as like a junior, right? And then what employment opportunities out there? Like you want to look at what's local to you, where you might be able to get into tech, that kind of stuff. So we're going to do practical stuff around that later. And then there's threats, right? There's things that are outside of your control. You really can't control these often, but like market saturation. I can't control that there's 10,000 other people putting in for a Windows Server's administration job, but I don't want to do Windows. So maybe I go, well, if I go up against Linux guys, I'm only going against 30 people for that same role. So maybe that's a little better, right, for me as far as that goes. I know the industry moves quickly. Technology's changing often, right? There's all this stuff coming. We had a talk a couple weeks back in our Discord where the Red Hat guy came in and he was showing, this was one of the engineers from Red Hat, and he was showing that right at the command line, you can just hit Q and then put a quote, and all of that AI stuff that I was showing, they basically have that in the terminal now in all the Red Hat systems, and it'll tell you, hey, here's all the answers to, oh, you wanted to know how to set up postfix. You never set up postfix before. Here's the configurations right here. You want me to apply them for you? And that stuff's all coming, right? We know that's kind of coming. But with the industry moving quickly, that's maybe a threat, but you can learn that and then you can acknowledge it and you can kind of keep working around through it. And then there's geopolitical threats, right? Like I was telling people I've been telling people for a while, like maybe you had been putting together all this stuff and you had this really awesome model for maybe exports from Russia to send things to America, and you'd been working on that for years. And then a few years ago, with no interaction with you or me or anybody we know, Russia attacked Ukraine, and that's not been very popular in the world stage. And now any business you wanted to do as an American, or probably most Europeans, with Russia is gone. Your whole business model that maybe your family had been running that stuff for years, like, I don't know, furniture out of Russia or something, can't do it anymore. You haven't been able to do that in the U.S. for, I don't know, 3-4 years now, however long that's been going on. But that's a geopolitical threat. Nothing you can do to stop that. You just kind of have to change your. Maybe you've been learning Russian your whole life, and then now you can't do anything with Russia. Well, that is a threat to you for sure, and it's outside of your control for the most part. So you might have to pivot, right? You might have to do something else. if you were doing your kind of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So again, these are general things, but you might go and formally put these down into something like this and say, okay, what are Scott's strengths? Well, Scott can look at a terminal all day. I know that I can do that, right? That's the strength of mine. A weakness of mine may be, again, I don't necessarily want to look and troubleshoot code all day. Not ever something that I've been super interested in. So that's a weakness of mine. Opportunities, there's a fair amount of Linux work if you know where to look for it. So I think that's an opportunity. And maybe threats. Yeah, the industry's changing. So it is a threat that the industry is constantly changing and I have to keep my skills sharp. But I remember learning that. I was sitting in a college class back in 2000. I was in the Army, and I remember sitting in a college class, and I realized if I'm going to be in tech, right? So this was 26 years ago. If I'm going to be in tech, tech is always changing. Tech has not stayed still the entirety of time that I've been involved with tech. So that was always a threat. But my strength was, well, I can keep learning new things. I can sit around and study these things and work at getting better. So I kind of understood that, and then I could kind of work through that. All right, so this is a formal kind of document that you could actually sit down and write in your notes. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my opportunities? And what are my threats? This, with that self-assessment, this with some of those other things, is going to help you to kind of put together where you want to go in your career. So your final deliverables for this section, when we do this as a workshop, this is going to be like a requirement to go write these down. And I may even add some more of these. But you should know what you want to do, whether or not it's inside of IT, right? Whether or not it's in tech. And this doesn't have to be like right now, like before we move on, everybody here gives me a thumbs up that they're doing this. But this is the idea that you should know what you want to do. I think that you should know what you want to do. I think you should know your strengths and weaknesses and how they will help or hinder you getting to that, right? And this should be formally written down in some way somewhere, right? And you should know the opportunities and threats that are out there in the industry. I think that these are all general things that you should know how to do. Now, some of you are going to note that I didn't use those SMART goals yet. We're going to use those SMART goals here in a little bit. I still want you to know what it means to have a SMART goal. But for this part of it, I really just think you should kind of take a look at yourself, kind of hold up a little scrying mirror and go, I am deficient in that way. Maybe I can't do this one thing, so maybe I need to pivot and go another way. Because, C.S. Lewis was the guy who said, if two people are on the wrong path, the guy who turns around and goes the other way is the one, he's the most ahead, right? I don't know, that's me butchering his quote, but that's generally the idea. If you're going down a path to be like an astrophysicist and then you realize, well, I'm probably not ever going to be astrophysicist materials, but I can go be a Linux engineer. Maybe that's a thing, right? That may be something that you take a look at. And maybe it's not because you're not capable. Maybe it's because you just look at it and go, yuck, I don't want to do that stuff. That's not interesting to me. And that's a very valid reason, right? Some people call that a crash out, but I'd say, it's better to find out now for free online that you don't want to do this stuff than later on when you're sitting in my 400 level college class with me going, hey, when do I not have to do this stuff anymore? Just like, I have a brother-in-law. This is actually a funny story. I've told you guys this before, but for people that haven't been here, I have a brother-in-law who's got a degree in chemical engineering. And when he got his bachelor's in chemical engineering, I was at like the little party we were doing for him. And I shook his hand and I said, hey, so when are you going to go get in the field and start going and doing this stuff? And he told me, he looked at me and he goes, Scott, I never want to do chemical engineering again for the rest of my life. And I'm like, but we're here. We were there literally celebrating his completion of his bachelor's of science in this chemical engineering field, and he told me he never wanted to do it again. And I was just like, man, 10 minutes at one of these things would have saved you 4 years of your life in a pretty well-known school for that too. Like the school he went to is pretty well known for chemical engineering, well, engineering in general, but chemical engineering for sure. But he's not working in that field, and it's been 4 years probably. Nope, just not interested in doing it. So anyways, my point is you could save yourself all that trouble. All right, so that's this first section here. You can call it quits here if you wanted. You can go mull over that stuff if you want, but we're going to continue on. Because I'm kind of timing this. That was about 40 minutes right there. So now this next one is learning Linux or your specific path. I really can only help you with the Linux side of things. I mean, I guess we can talk a little bit about security and networking as well. But like for me, it's mostly learning Linux. And, I run the professional Linux users group. So it kind of makes sense that I want to talk about Linux. But the stuff I'm going to show you, I think, will be generally acceptable for any type of IT role that you want to get into. So the focus of this is breaking into IT. So learning Linux, or just put in there if you want security or whatever. These are the things that I think that you should be doing. So let's start off with our second AI activity. So we'd pull up our little AI, whatever we're doing, whatever one we had from our list earlier. And you're going to ask it about the following discussion topics, going down the rabbit hole. Anywhere it directs you towards different terms that you're not familiar with, you go find those out, and then you take notes. It's very important that you take notes. And then these are the things that you would go ask it, some general things that you might want to know. And one that maybe is interesting to me is that bottom one. So I'm going to leave that up for a little while so you guys can do it. But I'll go to that bottom one and say, what are common Linux administration tasks? What are the things I'm going to do as a Linux administrator? Okay, I'm going to add users, put users into our systems. Cool. I'm going to give people the ability to do certain permissions. I'm going to be in charge of the permissions of the system. I'm going to control access to the system. That's true. I'm going to monitor and probably put storage and give new software. Yep. And I'm going to do all of those things. Cool. I'm probably going to look at how processes are running and what's started on the system and maybe protect the system in some way. That's true. I'm going to do networking and control what has access and what ports are open. That's true. I'm probably going to do a bunch of observability, which is metrics and logging. Look at all these things. They got all kinds of good stuff going on here. I'm going to protect the systems to a certain baseline level of security. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's my job. Okay. But the point is, you're doing this, right? You're filling out and answering yourself your questions around how you want to learn Linux, right? Now, if we were doing this live like we're going to do in a couple of weeks, then we would discuss this for another 10 minutes or so. What I'm going to tell you guys to do is, if you're watching this, pause it, go do those activities, write all these things out, make sure that you understand some of these things, and then we would continue on from there. Yeah, be a ninja. Yeah. Be somebody who can solve problems. I tell you guys all the time, like, Linux engineers get known very well for solving problems, and then we get pulled into all kinds of problem meetings. And I get pulled into stuff nowadays that has nothing to do with what I do as an engineer, but it's because, like, I've got good methodologies for troubleshooting and working through stuff, right? So that's another one. What are some troubleshooting methodologies? How do we troubleshoot? This is a skill in tech that you need to know how to do, all right? So again, look through those, do those at your leisure. Pause this video, go through this later, that kind of stuff. If you're watching it live, we're just going to keep moving on, and we're going to get into the lecture part, and then we'll go from there. Okay. So there's two things you do at the command line. I often say this. I often feel like people push back, and then people that have been doing it for a long time go, no, he's definitely right. But there's only two things that happen at the command line. There's standard input and standard output. But standard output is split into standard output and standard error. But at the end of the day, you're basically playing ping pong with the abyss. That's what it is. You're right here. The abyss, you stare into the abyss. The abyss stares back at you. You do something, and that thing responds back in some way, right? And you are either setting or configuring something, or you're checking or invalidating something. Those are the two things you do at the command line, right? And the system is either responding by telling you okay or error against basically these two things. Those are the two things you do at the command line. Now, this simplification, you're probably like, wait a minute, that's way simple. But as you do, if you just sit at a command line all day and you play around, you'll find you're always doing one of these two things. So knowing that makes it a little easier to learn command line, maybe it doesn't, but you are constantly, just checking. These are really only the two things we do in the systems world, right? So hands-on, there's no substitute for hands-on experience. I think that you should spend time learning things. There's an old saying that's been around in teaching a long time. I hear, I forget, I see, I remember, I do, I understand. So you guys often see me like talking with my hands like this, like, oh, I was typing this or whatever. There's no substitute for getting your hands on and learning this stuff. So here's a bunch of places that you can go to get your hands on the system. Killer Coda, free. SAD servers, free. I've only done a couple of SAD server scenarios because people have recommended them to me over the years, but they are really good. You want to learn Git branching, right? You want to go learn some stuff that you're probably going to use anywhere in IT. Git branching is a free tool that shows you how to do a bunch of Git commands and how to merge and branches and pull requests and all that stuff. W3 schools, like this used to be a site that was just really good 25 years ago. This was a really good site for just referencing. But now you can go to W3 schools and they'll show you how to write a web page, and they'll actually have you in little interactive tools that are free for you to use all over the site. They'll even teach you database queries with SQL. Pretty much all the SQL I know comes from W3 schools. Maybe I add a little bit of college on it, but nothing I remember. Most things I reference are from W3 schools. They're fantastic. And then I gave one example of what there's a million of, which is just places where you can go practice your daily coding, if that's your choice of path. I'm not necessarily, down in the coding weeds too far, but you can go do exercises on Coding Bat. They do Python and they do Java, right? Those are the two languages they do over there. But most of you can probably think of 30 other ones very quickly. You can also just throw it in your bot. Hey, where would I go practice coding for free? And there's all kinds of stuff out there. I know there's also, for people that are algorithm driven, there's Leet Code and some of those other ones, which are for people who, that's LEET, Leet Code. There's people who are, down in the weeds on that and really interested in that kind of stuff. But you got to get your hands on systems. Could you build your own home lab? Absolutely. Building a home lab is huge. That's something I mentioned a little later, but free lab environments out there without having to spend any money, and you could go spend hundreds of hours practicing this stuff. And if you go and you do that, right, and then you get into Killer Coda and you find, after, you do all the labs or something from somebody on Kubernetes or something, you just find that, like, this is not for you. Well, it's still, I mean, you spent about 20 or maybe 30 hours of your time, and for free, you found out that wasn't something you wanted to do. I still think that's a net win for you. Even if you go, well, but I didn't get anything out of it. Yeah, but you didn't go down the wrong path, so that's kind of valuable, right? In some ways, that's pretty good. So anyways, here's a bunch of places for you to go, hands-on labs, that kind of stuff. Now, there's certifications in the industry. There's all kinds of certifications out there, and my take on certifications has not changed over the years. Some of you guys know I have a whole bunch of certs, even though they don't really do anything for me in my career. Although it is funny, my college needed me to take a Linux Essentials cert the other day, and I thought that was really funny. But here's the thing about certifications. If we get done with this talk today and you go, Scott, that's really great, but I really don't know where to go in Linux. I do Linux. I've done some Killer Coda. I feel pretty confident at the command line, but I don't really know where to go. Well, this is why certifications are so useful. Not necessarily that you're going to go take a cert and spend your money. Let's just full stop. I'm not going to spend any money. But if I go learn the body of knowledge, that be okay. I learned this from project management. There's a thing called PMBOK, the project management body of knowledge. But in any other endeavor, you go and you take apart the certification, right? You go take that Linux Essentials certification and go, yeah, I felt like I would have just walked in and to pass that test at any given time. Sure. But even though I've been a Linux guy for a long time, and even though I've been teaching Linux for a long time, I remember I was doing that. I was doing the study and I was practicing some stuff and doing something. And I remember I even threw it up in, there was something that I had never done. I remember I actually missed this question on the test. There's something I have never done in all of my years of Linux, and it has to do with the command ls. So this is a fun one. I did not know that to show the Linux recursive ls, you use a -R. I didn't know that. Right? So I've never done that in all my career. I've been using Linux for a long time. I've never done that command. Never once. I do this, and then I go down into Ansible, and then I do that, and then I go down into Proxmox, right? And I have never recursively looked through all the directories underneath the directory. I never even thought to do that. It never occurred to me why I would even need that, because I kind of think of it like I'm in a room. Why would I try to look in the rooms that I'm not in? I'll go down in the room, right? And then you say, well, what if you wanted to find something? Yeah, but I'd do a find from where I'm at. I wouldn't go in there. Like, I'm not going to go down in there to search. So anyways, I had never used that command. ls-R. Pretty sure I got that wrong because I thought it was a lowercase r. But the point is, that body of knowledge would, if I had studied that more, I did study quite a bit, but the body of knowledge helps to fill in gaps where maybe you've been doing Linux this whole time, but you've always been on the identity and access management side of it. And you've been troubleshooting a lot of that and making sure LDAP works, but you don't really have strong knowledge of like the data structures or the underlying disk and partitions and that kind of stuff. Well, if you go and you study your body of knowledge or you go work through some of these other things, you're going to start to solidify some of these things that you aren't very good at, right? Or those things that you don't do professionally, right? So this is one of the reasons I think certifications are absolutely fantastic. Now, even if you're not going to spend any money and take the test, the body of knowledge is still fantastic to do. So what do I mean by body of knowledge? Let's go use an example here real quick. Let's say Linux Essentials, and often we call them objectives, right? So Linux Essentials objectives. So typically you can go find what all the objectives are for that. Now this is, since I'm in the AI mode, it's going to go pull it all down for me, but there's almost always like a web page somewhere. And you can go and you can pull down all of these objectives, and then you can see how well you actually think you can adhere to those, right? Like I come in here and I go, okay, I understand users and groups, and I think I understand etc passwd, and that's a file that has all of the user entries. It maps usernames to user IDs. It has 7 fields across for each user. Those fields are, and I can name all the fields, right? That kind of stuff. You guys have been around, you know that. Do I know what etc shadow is? etc shadow is where we store the passwords that we used to keep back in the day in etc passwd, but this is a file that anybody can read. So now in that second field where password is, we store an X, and then we store the hashed version of a SHA-256, is it SHA? No, it's SHA-512 hashed version of the password in etc shadow, right? And I can know those things, right? And I can work through those, and I can study those, and I can know all of these areas that maybe otherwise I'm kind of weak in. So certification paths, again, even if you're not going to spend money, they're an excellent way to make sure that you understand all the topics around some tool or technology or any kind of stuff like that. Okay. So then we come down, here's all the certs that I know of that are free. The training and the taking of the cert is free. So this is one of those ones that I like to challenge people. If you're going to get into tech and you maybe want to go security, or maybe you want to go Linux, or maybe you want to go networking, and you're kind of maybe on a fence on which of those is most interesting to you, and you're using this to maybe help you find that out. One thing you can do while you're figuring that out is go study one of these things and at least have something else nice, because these certs, again, every one of these certs here are free. You can go have something nice to put on your resume that will bolster your resume for the part that we're going to talk about here a little later on. So maybe there's some general engineering stuff where process improvement is always important. And you might say, well, you know what, I want to be a Linux engineer. I don't think I'm going to need to do process improvement, but you are. You're going to get asked questions about like what's the best path to take, and instead of just saying, well, I think or I hope this is the path we should take, you can actually write out your thoughts on a process improvement model and make something actually objectively better. And if it doesn't make it objectively better, you can prove that it did or didn't behave the way that you intended it to, or the way that the vendor told you it would, or whatever, because you understand process improvement. So I don't think these first two ever, I think that these are valuable in any context for engineering, right? If you want to if you tell me, hey Scott, I want to get into engineering, I think both of these are excellent, and they're both free. They're free to train for, and they're free to take. So that's cool. You get a little Six Sigma white belt on your resume. It's nice. There's also API. This API Academy has changed over the years, but we have a pretty good study guide on it too. I think this changed because those people bought them, the same ones that Broadcom bought them, and they changed this up. So I don't know if this one's actually free. I should go check that one of these days. But Gremlin Chaos Engineering, fantastic one. Most of us in the Discord got that a few years back just to be funny, but it's a fantastic site reliability engineering type certification. And it's free. And then Dastragon, this guy put together a really good GitHub that has all kinds of just hundreds of hours worth of stuff to go study on chaos engineering, right? So maybe you want to get into site reliability engineering, or you kind of want to focus on DevOps type things, and these kind of topics will help you get towards that, right? Because they really focus on chaos engineering focuses on the scientific method, looking at disasters and what would happen if certain things turned off in our network and in our systems and that kind of stuff. And then there's a networking one where you can't go wrong with knowing IPv6. That thing's been coming towards the industry for like the last 20 years. Now, I know it's out there, but most people are still using IPv4 inside of corporations and stuff. So knowing IPv6 is still fantastic, though. All right, so here's free training where the certification is not free, but all the training is free. So there's a bunch of things for you guys to look at and think about, right? Like all the hands-on labs on Killer Coda. It's all free. Killer Coda has everything on Kubernetes that you could want, but if you don't want to go and take the test, you can still do all the training there for free. All the other belt levels is Six Sigma. The studying for that's all free if you wanted. Terraform and Vault, which are HashiCorp tools, those are free to study. The certifications for those are only about $75 each, so they're not too bad. I used to hold both of these. I never renewed them, but they're both pretty good. I'm still a big fan of Vault. It's a great tool. Then there's data science and general web stuff and general Linux and web security. There's all kinds of things where you can just go train and get ready for certifications, that kind of stuff. All right, then this is maybe one of the most important things that I can tell you guys to do as far as learning some technology, right? You need to get your fingers on the pulse, right? Get your fingers on the pulse. I think you need to listen to how engineers talk about things. I think you should learn how people that are in the industries that you want to go into talk about the technologies that they're working on. I think that there's really good technology podcasts out there, right? But I often warn people, don't get sucked into infotainment. There's all kinds of people out there who are entertaining. And if you want to be entertained, by all means, go watch Obsession and Project Hail Mary and fun movies and stuff like that. But don't think when you're watching those that you're training for your job role. If you set aside 30 minutes every morning for getting into tech, right, which is something we're going to talk about here in a little bit, you have to set your time and you have to work on getting into this. If you struggle getting into anything, then you need to set a time and do it. Don't get sucked in by infotainment. If somebody's like entertaining, but they're doing tech stuff, but they're not really teaching it to you, it's still fine to watch them. I'm just saying that that's not part of your study sessions. That's something else where you're just kind of hanging out with people. And there's a lot of examples that I can give. I'm not going to give anybody specific, but there's some that some of you guys know that I just don't think there's any value in some of it. Then I think you should get in Slack, Discord, Usenet groups that are about the topics you're interested in. There's some really good ones out there for people that want to study for CISSPs, which is a security certification. Some people want to get into data analytics, so that's what that Measure Camp and Measure Slack are. I think you should get involved in open source projects. There's all kinds of open source projects out there. You could be writing code right now, debugging things, you can go look at source code anywhere on Git, right? There's all kinds of stuff out there. I specialize in, my career has largely been in high performance compute, but there's a whole bunch of initiatives that are out there. You can go get on their mailing lists. You can see what technologies and tools they're using and things that are interesting and that kind of stuff. But there's all that stuff out there for that. And then there's a bunch of resources out there from the government, right? I'm constantly showing people that NOAA, who I actually work underneath NOAA, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Agency, they have seminars all the time. Their library series has free open to the public seminars that show you how to use the open data that comes out of the government. And then you could take that and turn that into some type of research you want to get into, or, again, this goes back to what are you interested in doing? This is something you have to kind of think to yourself from that first section. But there's a lot of resources out there for you to do it. This one shocked me the other day. I went to data.gov. Last time I had been on there were like 383,000 data sets that were available. Let's go there real quick. I want to show you guys this. It was over 500,000 last time I checked, just the other day. How many of them are there? It shows it right here. Where's it at? Here's the data. 552,363 data sets are available now. Again, a few months ago when I was on there, it was 380-something thousand. So they are massively growing their data sets. And then you say, well, but what is there that I want to do? And I say, well, figure out what you're interested in. And if you go do some data analytics stuff, there's all kinds of information out here. You could do crime, right? Maybe you're in California and you want to look for the best city based on crime statistics. I remember this one's been around a while, the police performance and attrition for Los Angeles. There's a bunch of them from Los Angeles. that you can look up. But then you can go figure out what area codes inside of Los Angeles are the most dangerous. You can do, and then there's just all kinds of stuff you can do. I'm not trying to, again, be prescriptive there. I'm just saying, if that's interesting to you, you got to lean into it. You got to lean into the things you want to do in the industry, right? But industry discussion, find other people that are doing stuff similar to you, and then kind of sit with them. I talk about like sitting with the engineers and listening to the way that engineers talk about things, and then hearing some word that you don't know, and then going off and researching it a little bit and going, oh, that's why he's talking about. That's why that guy always says that word orthogonal. What the hell does he mean orthogonal? And then this other guy says, well, no, it's not orthogonal. It's a red herring. What the heck's he talking about? You know, we're not talking about fish, and we're not talking about shapes. We were talking about some engineering problem that we have, right? But that guy kept saying orthogonal, and that guy kept saying red herring. What the heck were they talking about, right? And they were both saying the same thing generally, not precisely, but generally, right? But what do those words mean, and how do they deal with us as engineers? And you sit with engineers, and you go and you learn what these different things mean, right? All right, so the final deliverables for this section, there's a few more, right? I think that you should have a scheduled time to study every day on your topic. There's an old saying, you don't find time, you make time. And I tell people, if you get up at 6 a.m. every day to go break rocks for 8 hours, but you want to get into tech, but you get up at 6 a.m. every day and break rocks, now you got to get up at 5:30 and study for the first half hour. You got to, if you say, Scott, I do these other things and I don't get to play with the command line every day. I say, well, you've got to back up and you've got to do the thing. You got to make time to do the thing you want to do. So you need to get at least 30 minutes every day on your topic. You can't crash. This is big. I tell my college students this. You can't crash everything you need to do for 4 hours on a Sunday night. It doesn't work like that. Think about that. If you did that at the gym, would you be in very good shape? I can assure you, you would not. So you have to touch your topics every day, right? You should know the exact body of knowledge for the topics you want to learn. So let's say you tell me, Scott, I want to do Linux. I'm not in Linux, but I want to do Linux. I say, okay, go back to your little AI there and say course objectives or certification objectives for RHCSA, right? Red Hat certified. Linux LPIC, right? LPIC is one of them. Linux Essentials. Get those body of knowledge docs and go put them in your notes and be able to say, I do or I don't know how to do these things. I may even have one here because I do this with my college students sometimes. I think I have, let me see across the top here if I have all of the, I might have closed them down, but I normally have the Cisco ones open. Oh, here's the, this is the certified in cybersecurity, which is an ISC squared certification. Here's all the certifications. So you tell me, hey, Scott, I want to get into cybersecurity, but I don't know where to start or what to do. And I say, well, here's your security principles from the cybersecurity. It's called certified in cybersecurity. It's the lowest level EC squared domain, right? It's the lowest one. And here's all of the things that they want you to know how to do. And then you can go break that down. And now you would have a thing that you can go study for the next 3 to 6 month plan. So I say you should pick at least one of those free certificates that I showed earlier and just go knock it out. Get that IPv6 cert, go get a Gremlin cert. You can go get that Gremlin certification today if you wanted. But the Gremlin certification isn't the interesting thing, although it looks nice on a resume. It's the interesting thing is that you know how to talk about the ideas around, in that case, chaos engineering, but really site reliability engineering, right? And then you dig more into site reliability engineering and you go, I can do this stuff. I could help keep people's technology running. Yeah, I could do that. And then now you've got a thing to go drive towards for your career. I think you should know the exact resources you will be using to learn the topics around your technology. So if you've picked that body of knowledge and you've said, hey, I want to learn, Gremlin engineering or chaos engineering or whatever, I'm going to go study this guy Dastergon's GitHub account, and I'm going to go in and study these things for the next 12 hours and be ready to take the test or whatever. I think you should have a 3 to 6 month plan based on SMART goals. Those are the goals from the last section, right? And to prepare to work in this space. So I want to get into Linux engineering or Linux administration, and I know what the job looks like because of this body of knowledge, and these are the things I'm going to study and be good at and be able to put on a resume that I know how to do. There you go. I think you should plan to learn troubleshooting with your own lab environments and reading blogs on technology deployment. So I didn't really mention those much, but I think if you have a lab, you should continue practicing running your lab and getting in there and building stuff and that kind of stuff, because I do think that's valuable. And we're going to talk more about what the job is here in the next section, what the tech job looks like. But that's a important thing there. So. And then this is maybe the most important thing I can tell you. Find a group of like-minded people that are working on the same things you are, right? If you want to get into Linux, join a Linux users group. Local to you, the professional Linux users group, we meet on Discord. They're a place that you can go. That's one of the few things that I'll say here is prescriptive. You've got to find a group of people that are doing similar stuff to you. And often, like I tell my college students this, like I tell you guys this sometimes in meetings, but do you really think the value of college is just coming and sitting for a few hours and listening to a guy like me talk? Even sitting here listening for me talk for a few hours. Is that the value? No, it's really not if you think about it, because honestly, you can go find, and I've told college students this, you can go find a lot of this same information online, right? Maybe not as directed and maybe not, somebody responding answers to you. But one of the most valuable things about college is having other people around you that are also driving towards that same goal. So then you and your 2 or 3 or 4 little study buddies can lean on each other when you're like, hey, you know what? I don't really understand this. Scott kept mentioning these smart technologies, and man, I know I asked the AI and this, but how do you understand that? And then they explain it to you a different way, and you're like, you know what? That is a pretty good way. Or you go, you know what? I don't agree with the way you said it, but I do see it now. And it's this idea that like a coal of a fire, when you have a fire, if the coals fall out to the side, they get cold over time. We want to push them all up, right? We want to push all the coals together so that the fire stays hot. And that's what it is to be in an academic setting. But the same idea is like find a group of like-minded people that are working on the same things as you are, and you'll find that the drive to get there stays. You push each other along. You cheer each other's achievements, and even if you don't cheer somebody, which I think you should cheer people, but let's say you don't. Maybe you got this personality where you're like, that person's doing better than me. So now you're like, that person's doing better than me. I got to work harder. So it's still, you see what I'm saying? It doesn't matter what your internal motivations are. You only got to answer to yourself for that stuff. But the point is, you're driving yourself forward because you're moving with another group or a school or whatever. Yeah, there's an OpenStax college resource. Trevor, I'm gonna grab some of these things that people mentioned and I'm gonna put them in here. We're just doing a practice right now, kind of my practice run, but also kind of the recording for this before we do this with the Professional Linux User Group in 2 weeks. By the way, people always ask me, but when we do workshops, I never record them. So the one in Discord will not be recorded. And the reason for that is because people are much more candid when they're not being recorded, right? People will be able to, they'll speak up and that kind of stuff. If they feel like they're being recorded and it's going to be watched later, they're not going to speak up. So I don't want to limit anybody kind of in like a more classroom setting. So that's something to think about. But these are the final deliverables for your section on how you're going to learn more about what you want to do in your job. Okay. When I say final deliverables, by the way, I don't mean you have to know those by the end of like right now before I move on. But you should be able to look at this and say, these are the things that I will have down now, like in the next few days, and then I'll have that plan going forward for the next 3 to 6 months around SMART goals and around those bodies of knowledge of things that we want to do. Now, again, one of those criticisms I've had is people have said, hey, Scott, you're not always breaking this down. You're not like being that mama bird and chewing it up and just throwing it up into my mouth for me like the little mama birds do for the babies. I'm going as low level and simple as I can here to say this is how if I was starting all over, this is how I would try to break into tech if I wasn't in tech right now. I would go and I would look at the individual pieces and I would study them until I had a big cohesive thing that I could show to somebody. We're going to get there in a little bit and say, I know how to do this work. All right. So that's that. Now, let's talk about working in tech. Some of this is going to seem kind of like I'm jaded from working in tech so long, but what does the daily job look like? And some of this is going to be funny, I hope, but the point of this is to show you guys what a day in the life, what we call a diddle, what the day in the life of a tech person might look like. What are you going to run into? Yeah, I do have the meetings in here, Hack the Planet, that's true. But here's our third AI activity. So if you've been following along, I gave you guys a list of AIs to go pick from. Again, any study buddy you want, I don't care. But this is because this is the way the job's going to work, right? AI is going to be there. You're probably going to have a co-pilot, or you're going to have, I know with some of the government stuff, I have internal Google tools. Google has all kinds of Gemini built into anything. And I could take something like this and say, hey, turn this into a 6-slide document for me that looks real nice. And they would break this all out. Now, I did want to put this all on one slide, so I didn't do anything like that. But the point is, AI is in everything. Even this is all PowerPoint. But when I was working on all of this, there was a little designer on the right side that was constantly going, hey, bro, you want to do this? You want to change this slide up in this way? And I'm like, no, get out of here. But sometimes I did take them because they actually looked pretty nice. But okay, so you're going to ask your AI bot about working in tech. And the first one is, you might just stop right there and say, what types of meetings am I going to do? There's all kinds of meetings you're going to get pulled into. And there's all kinds of meetings that I'm going to advise that you would kind of dodge early on in your career, especially. But another thing, where does the work come from for Linux administrators in an operational environment? If I'm sitting down and, I got hired today and I sit down and there's 50 or 1,000 Linux machines in front of me, right? I'm at my terminal, I'm in my jump box, I'm in my environment. And where's the work come from? What happens to cause, what are the triggers for me to have to go, oh, okay, I'll go fix that? Or what are the things that I should be doing to keep that environment operational? Then what does it mean to have these different environments like dev, test, QA, and prod? How do they differ, right? So again, if you guys are doing this later or you're watching this non-live, just pause it here, go through all of this and come back. Then we go from there. What are the policies, procedures, and documentation in tech? There's a lot of policies and procedures and things that you're going to have to adhere to. Hyper asked, are there remote jobs or all in person? So that's actually a good question. I get into that later at the very end, the sixth topic when I talk about applying for jobs. But real quickly, I'll tell you, remote jobs nowadays, at least from what I've been seeing, remote jobs tend to be more mid and senior level. And a lot of you guys that are doing and this is, I almost feel like this is somewhat unfortunate, but a lot of the all-in-person stuff is the way that we get in to start, right? So when we're junior or entry level, some of these jobs we're going to have to actually go into physically, which, I mean, that it is what it is. But some of this getting into tech is actually physically going and working in data centers. That's a common way to get in. Going and finding an office building that's doing something else, but they still need tech, right? They still have a tech role in there that you can at least get into. So I do think that you guys can get into these roles in that kind of way. Also, Krupp, I don't speak. I think that probably is Russian. I don't speak that, so please use English if you can. I'm not going to be able to help you with whatever that question is. But dev, test, QA, and prod is always customer facing. It's always the thing that's making your company money. These lower environments tend to be some level of environments where we can mess around and do things to make sure that the environment's going to be stable before it moves forward. Krupp, you said, what distro do I use? I use a lot of distros, mostly Rocky. Rocky's probably my most common distro professionally. I also use SLES quite a bit professionally, I guess. And then here's the types of documents. What types of documents are going to be out there? You're going to run into all types of things. But what's a POAM? Plan of actions and milestones. Why do we use POAMs? What is a RACI chart, and what do I get out of a RACI chart? That kind of stuff. And then fit for warranty, fit for use. What does that mean? What does it mean for something to be fit for warranty and fit for use, and how do we determine that? There's different types of functional and non-functional testing that helps us determine that. What is a proof of concept? What is a minimum viable product? Why would I want to know those things, right? What are those things interesting for? Krupp said, what's my favorite? Favorite distro? I mean, I guess whichever one I get paid to work on, but mostly probably Rocky right now. Rocky's probably the one that I've deployed the most in the last probably 15,000 systems I've deployed. I'd say 13,000 of them were Rocky. The other ones were all RHEL. And that's been based on like government systems and stuff that I was working on. And then what is uptime? How do we express uptime? What might that look like? Often we represent them in this number of nines. We call it the number of nines. And what are KPIs or key performance indicators? So when you're thinking about working in tech, this is not an exhaustive list. I mean, this just keeps going. But these are some things that I think would be valuable to kind of prime the pump and get you kinds of thinking about this stuff. All right. We will discuss this. And then when we do this as a workshop in 2 weeks, this will be 10 minutes. How old am I? I'm 45. I'm a grandpa, by the way, too. I got a almost 6-year-old grandbaby. All right. But I've been doing tech for 25 years. So hopefully that does that. But anyway, so these are this is kind of, again, if we were doing this as the actual workshop, we'd be pulling up the our little bot here, whatever our little AI is, and we would be asking it questions and allowing it to kind of give us answers that would guide some of this for us to go study about. Okay? So that's the idea of working in tech. Let's talk a little bit about what the IT job is, right? So what is a company doing? And this diagram right here is called the PPDIOO diagram or chart. It comes from Cisco. And what I've done is I've modified it in a little way and talked about how most of you are probably going to get into tech. Because the question a few minutes ago was like, are there remote jobs or are they in person? Most of them, honestly, guys, probably in person as you start nowadays. It's just kind of the way it is. But how are you probably going to get on tech if you're trying to get into tech? You're probably going to be over in the operations section. This is where I spent a lot of my career. And what operations is the company's already got something built. They already are running services and processes in the world. They've already got Linux systems and networks and firewalls up and that kind of stuff. And you're going to come in and you're going to operate those systems. You're going to manage, resolve, repair, and replace those systems as they get to their end of service life. And you're going to keep the thing running along in whatever way that you do. As you start out in operations, your primary KPI, your key performance indicator, is going to be uptime. How available do you keep that system? Oh, yeah, Julian, the crime statistics, yeah. You're probably back a little bit if you're just mentioning that now. But so we get in with operations. Then, as we're sitting there and we're working in operations as some admin or tech, we often think about how to make things better. And we optimize the system in some way. We update documentation. I tell people often, if you get in a company and you just start making all the documentation better, you might say, Scott, that's the most tedious stuff. Yeah, but what are you doing else on third shift? You're sitting on third shift reading Batman comics, looking at, and you can only read so many Batman or Schlock Mercenary comics or whatever before you're just tired of it and you're like, okay, I'm going to put my feet down off this desk and actually. And if you start updating documentation, I'm telling you right now, people find that super valuable. Even if you're just like, all I did was update, like this thing pointed at these other 3 servers. And when I got to the document, it was wrong because those servers have been rebuilt and have a new name. So I just fixed the doc. You start being the person that's touched all the docs and updated them and kept people from just kind of stumbling over the little crap that's out there in your documentation space. Your manager is going to think very, very highly of you. I'm just going to tell you that. Even without being able to quantify that, I just know that that's a way that management likes people do stuff. That's a form of optimization of the system, right? And then people that operate the systems and start to optimize them, they're the ones that the company tends to trust to go do these other things. And this tends to be more like the engineer work over here, where you prepare and plan things and then design and implement them into a running system, right? But we get in over here. The point is to think about getting into tech. This is a talk on breaking into tech. This is what we need to do. We need to keep systems running. When we get later into the talking about like the interview process, in the interview, at the end of the day, you're trying to convince somebody that they can give you the reins for 4 or 6 or 8 hours or whatever your shift is to keep that system running. That's what you're trying to convince somebody. They want to know 2 things. Can you do the job? Will you do the job? But the job that they're asking you about when you first get on is, can you keep this system running so that the company keeps making money over here? That's the general rule of operations work. So when we're talking about operations, what is the job most of the time for us starting out is keeping a system that's already there running. Okay, so this is where we get in. So why do companies have IT departments? There's typically two roles that I've fallen into in my career, and this is not exhaustive, but IT departments tend to be one of these 2 things. You are the product. Sometimes you're the product, and this is going to be more rare. I probably should have put this one first. But you're the product. Maybe they sell IT services and you interface with customers and provide a product or service. So you are the thing making the company money. And this has been like when I was at Lockheed Martin and I was the engineer. When I'm at Redline currently and I work for the government, we are selling me as a service to the government. In this case, my project work tends to come from project managers, maybe solutions architects, and then I'm interfacing with customers and building stuff and making it work, that kind of stuff. And then when I troubleshoot or work on things, it comes from external customers. So like I'm on call right now for Noah, and if they were to call out right now, I'd have to stop the stream and I'd have to go work on my other system over here and get whatever system's busted back working. That's what would happen. Or I would get whatever part of the components back working the way that they should. But that's an external customer that I am kind of, if you want to think of it as rented out for my time on the product. But often, and maybe the most common, especially the one that I was just showing, is you're a cost center. This is an interesting thing because you're not making the company money. You might work for an insurance company, and I did this for a long time in my career, but they're using me to support their business processes. They have business continuity plans and business impact analyses and all these other things in that, like, hey, if this process goes down and we can't bill our customers, then we lose money. Or if this process goes down and we can't take an auto insurance claim over our app on the weekend when somebody gets in an accident, we're going to lose that customer and possibly even lose money. That's not good, right? Companies don't want that. So you're a cost center. You cost the company money, but in return, right, they get you to keep things running for them. So your project work will come from management, and those are operations managers, so typically over your teams that you're on, and maybe other IT departments need support to make things work more smoothly or to understand how different things interact. You can get pulled into meetings sometimes, some of these meetings I'm going to talk about here. And then your troubleshooting work will come from monitoring, so system monitoring. You're tracking things and seeing where systems are starting to hit what we call high water marks of usage, or where pain points are occurring, right? And then also from trouble tickets from users that need to either have the system explained to them better so that you fix the user, or where the system needs to be fixed in such a way that the user can do the activities that they need. Those are the types of things that troubleshooting work tends to come from. And then with with the monitoring side of it, a lot of times you're going to be either adjusting capacity or fixing things that are wrong with systems, maybe the way that they're set up. And then with trouble tickets, you're either fixing the users because they have poor expectations, or you are actually fixing the systems in some way. A very common thing that users will send in tickets for is, I don't have permissions to do this. Well, now you've got a problem, because it's like, now I've got two problems, because now I've got this user that wants permissions, but we're probably butting up against some type of rule of least privilege or security component of why the user doesn't have those permissions. And then we need to go, maybe sometimes we have to sit down with their team and determine, oh no, your service account should have these permissions, but your individual user should not. Your service account can deploy those services on your set of maybe dev servers or whatever you have. Yeah, we'll go ahead and get that in the sudoers file. We'll get that pushed out and we can test that later this morning or something like that, right? These are the things that we can kind of talk about. Alpha Victor char, that's pretty good. Yeah, trying to data mine information on me. I don't think it would be too hard to find out how old I am, though. Yeah, so these are the things that your IT departments tend to exist for, either to make the company money in some way, or they're a cost center keeping other business processes running. Okay, so what do companies expect of IT departments? What are they expecting from you, right? Well, they want stable and secure systems, typically in that order as well, although security does kind of deal with stability. But from an IT department way of looking at these, we have uptime, right? Uptime is expressed as a number of nines. So this is like a 4-9 example, 99.99% uptime, right? Then stability is basically customer-facing systems operate within their intended functional and non-functional requirements. Functional requirements are checking boxes that it does certain things. Non-functional requirements are, does it handle the capacity or load as often as it's supposed to, right? Security then is focused around this concept of CIA. You'll always hear this in your career, but confidentiality is who can see, integrity is who can change, and that can both be on purpose or on accident, right? On purpose is like who has the permissions to change things, and then on accident is, does entropy affect your systems that have been saved and data that's been stored in some way because you didn't have proper backups or ways to read it or that kind of stuff. So integrity is not just changes to the system. Sometimes it's Integrity can be the entropy of time and that kind of stuff. And then availability, how often can the service be reached? And that goes back to your uptime. So IT departments will conduct what we call business impact analysis. And some of these things that I have in here are there so that you can go and throw them in your notes and go, well, I don't really know what that means. Well, business impact analysis is to determine the criticality of this service. So we've got this service that processes billing from our customers, and it goes out on the 15th and maybe 15th and 29th or something of the month, whatever our days are, and it bills all of our customers. And if it's down either of those 2 days, we have massive payroll problems, we have massive cash flow problems, whatever. So the business impact analysis of that system being up is very high, especially on those 2 days. So a lot of times in financial, and I know this is from working in a fair amount of financial stuff over the years, we will have like the 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, and 31st. So like those 5 days or sometimes 4 days, you can't touch the system at the end of the month. It's a financial freeze on all this, or it's a freeze on all the financial systems. That's almost universal. Can't make any changes to them. I'm actually in a system right now with the government where we're on the twilight of it. So it's a 10-year. The system's been up about 10 years, and we're decommissioning off it and then moving to a new system. And when we get, I think it's December of this year, we go into a freeze, and we will not be able to change the system for the last year and a half of the system existing. And you say, wow, that's kind of wild. Yeah, no, we'll be able to fix it and keep it running, but we won't be able to make any sizable or like notable changes to the current system. All changes will be starting to be built into the newer system as it's being tested and stuff. But anyways, business impact analysis. If this thing goes down, how much money do we lose? That's what business impact analysis is. It's almost always done against the production environments only. However, sometimes because dev environments can have so many people sitting on them and using them, dev environments can sometimes be involved in this as well. They develop from that the business continuity plan. So if that impact is realized, there is something taken down, what do we do from that, right? Like how do we get that back up? And then how do we plan for systems eventual failures? All systems fail over time. That's a rule of engineering. Simple engineering, right? Like systems break down over time. They don't make themselves better over time. That's never been observed in an engineering sense ever on this planet. So business continuity plans deal with eventual system failure. This all rolls up into what we call then sometimes a BDPR, but disaster recovery plans, DR for now. That's all we really care about. Yeah. So this is what they expect of us, right? If we're going to be in IT, this is what they want. And if you're in an operations team, almost universally, the primary key performance indicator you're going to deal with is uptime of that system, availability of that system. Okay. So how do we build things? Well, there's this concept of fit for use and fit for warranty. I mentioned earlier a proof of concept and a minimum viable product. Well, fit for use is the idea that if we're building stuff for a process, right? Somebody wants a web server and they want it to be on a Linux system. Well, the web server is going to be on Linux. Okay, cool. We can check off it's a Linux box. Cool. Probably a baseline Linux server to the minimum, whatever our baseline is for our company. Sometimes that's STIG standard. Sometimes it's CIS benchmarks, whatever. But I can check that off. It is hardened to all of these sections. Cool. Boom. Is it running a web server? Well, that web server is on port 80 or port 443. Probably want to use TLS. So port 443, check. I can hit it on port 443 and it runs. It is backed by the proper certificate authority. It's got the proper PKI certificate, so I can do and establish a TLS, connection with it. Okay, cool. Those are all functional checks. And what I mean by that, at the end of the day, when I say a functional check, you can go and I can give you a test for it, and you can go check that is good. Yeah, I see it working. I see a good output. Cool. It would be like this. This would be a functional check. If I just went like this, if I said curl www.google.com. Gave me back a web page. Cool. Is it currently on? Is Google currently serving a web page from www.google? Yeah, it sure is. All right. Does that help me in any other way? No. In fact, if I was doing it as a script, not that we're going that far in, I might only care about this. Is that it returned code of 0, right? So our return code was 0, therefore that was good. And if I was doing that in a script, I would be able to say, boom, I don't really care what the output was because I'm never going to look at it. It was run in a script, but I can look that the return code was 0, which is analogous to true in this case. So cool, I got a website coming. And that would be a very valid check if you just had something that was checking all of your websites were up. Cool, functional check. This is different than fit for warranty or non-functional testing. Does the system do as it's supposed to as often as it's supposed to? This speaks to the stability of the system. So fit for warranty is the idea that maybe I go use K6s. K6s is a tool for underneath Grafana where we can spin up a bunch of load testing to servers. And does this server, I expect this server to operate at about 300 users at a given time. If I were to go to 500 users and the 501st user tried to connect, would this still serve a web page, or would this just fall over and break because it couldn't handle one more load, one more piece of connection, one more whatever? That's fit for warranty. Is how does the thing behave in the wild? Does it do what it's supposed to as often as it's supposed to start, or as often as it's supposed to, right? So we use non-functional testing to determine this. So non-functional testing deals with how something behaves in the wild. How many connections can something have? What are the, if we're sending in, over 500 API calls per second, are we receiving a certain number of 200 errors? Do we keep at 500, 200 errors, or do we start to experience a certain amount of 400 errors or 500 errors? And what do those errors mean, right? We need to understand the difference between those memes. Actually, I'm just on a little early today because I wanted to practice this and kind of walk through this test a little bit, or walk through this before we do this. We're going to do this formally down in the Discord in 2 weeks, but I'm recording it now for anybody that kind of wanted to see it. Okay, so where do operations work come from? You're sitting there, you're at your desk. You've got monitors up on the wall, right? Grafana monitors, what we call dashboards often, and they're doing whatever. But then you've got this tool called OTRS. I love OTRS. It's a great open source tool, but you can also pay for it. And OTRS is a ticketing system where users can send in emails and they'll actually get turned into work tickets if you want them to. But monitoring systems, right? So if you monitor systems, and you see one of these go dark, or you see one of these spike on usage, or you see some link over here go down, that may be something that causes you to go, oh shoot, I got to go get that system back up, right? You can also build from your monitoring tools and performance tools what we call alerts. Alerts are things that actually leave a closed-in system and come out to a pager. Yes, we used to carry pagers, a cell phone, a email, right? But typically more critical than email, you typically have to alert outside of the system and wake people up. So it's almost always a call of some type. But monitoring systems is one place that we get work. And sometimes we don't see something go red. We just see some spike like this on Monday morning and we go, oh shoot, that system is getting overloaded on Monday mornings. We need to deal with something. We need to do something to kind of deal with how much load that system's taking. Do we need to split it out, put it behind a load balancer, give it a virtual IP? Like what are our different remedies for that? But anyways, this is where some of our work comes from, is monitoring systems, seeing how they behave in daily life and seeing where their pain points are and that kind of stuff, where their load happens. Then you're going to get user trouble tickets. Users are going to get themselves into all kinds of silly trouble. Sometimes users have legitimate problems where they, just can't do something that security's stopping them from doing. And now they need to either be, again, we either have to fix the user or we have to fix the system. Sometimes you got to fix the user. Hey, you're never going to get that permission from us. Okay. Because they'll just ask for root. And you're like, I can't give you root. But I can give you this shiny little, you give them like a shiny little toy. You're like, oh, here, so you can have this instead. That's like nail clippers. But anyways, the point is like, yeah, you give them some shiny other thing. But no, users can't have root, not even on their own dev systems, because they'll just do all kinds of ratchet things and you can't let them do that. So user trouble tickets, sometimes you got to fix the users. Sometimes they do have legitimate things that they need to have permissions for. And then we need to go and modify our sudoers file in some way. And I've shown this in different contexts and different labs and stuff that are on Killer Code that our group supports, the Professional Linux users group. But we can use tools like Ansible to push a sudoers file fix to all of their environments, and then now their user automatically has those permissions that we've discussed or that they should be able to have, right? That's something that we do. And trouble tickets from users can be all kinds of things. Sometimes they'll just be like, I can't find my mouse. And you're like, oh God, send this over to the desktop team, right? But the point is, trouble tickets come in from the users. You got to deal with them. And then you're going to get manager drive-bys. Managers are going to literally drive by and shoot at you. No, but users or managers are sometimes in some ways worse than users because you have to listen to them. But managers will just drive by. This used to happen all the time when we'd sit in cubicles, and they'd just be like, hey, can you get this for me? Or can you do that for me? Or, hey, can you send me over an email with this usage report? I'm about to go walk into a meeting. So sometimes, and this is also, I think this is a good problem to have because I've always been the tech lead. That just means that you're kind of valuable to the manager. Like, they trust that you're going to get stuff done. They know that by the time they walk 5 minutes over that meeting, they're already going to have that email so they can pull it up and show or whatever that dashboard is that they need, because they know that you'll get that information to them. But manager drive-bys tend to be things that are of like a higher urgency, but they're almost always tied back to one of these two things anyways, right? Maybe something that another team noticed or another team's asking about, and your manager heard it from their manager, and then it kind of gets pushed over and dropped down on you. These are the things, this is where operations work tends to come from for us in the field. Okay. Now, types of meetings. You're going to run into a lot of meetings, right? If you're an operations team member, you may have less meetings, but there are some certain meetings you're still going to run into. But as you get into, especially like engineering roles, as you kind of move up in your career, you're going to be what's called an individual contributor. You have work items and artifacts and deliverables on projects that have to be done. To me, and I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but it's true. Anytime you drag me into a meeting, you're wasting. I mean, you already paid for my time, but I'm saying you're wasting my time that could be done doing those other things. So in some ways, especially from an engineering standpoint, or for sure from an individual contributor standpoint, meetings are our enemy. We don't want to be drug into meetings, right? That's kind of a thing that we want to stay away from. Yeah, I say tech lead so nobody thinks that I was like the manager. I don't want anybody to ever think I'm the manager. But by knowing what to expect in meetings, you can be better prepared for them. And sometimes you can do that. You know that old saying about like, this meeting could have been a fist fight, or this meeting could have been an email. That's true. And sometimes if you understand what people want in meetings, you can get out of meetings. And I know this from being a guy who has tried to get out of meetings my entire career. So maybe this is one of the things I excel at here more than anything else. But no, what I mean by that is, if your manager wants you every morning to be in an operations meeting, but you instead provide your manager with the information that he needs or what he was going to ask you for, maybe he doesn't need you in that meeting, right? Or maybe he only needs you in the meeting if there was a problem, a call out that night, but you've been feeding him the right information, or you have reports that go to him with the right information, and now he doesn't need you in that meeting. And this is kind of the things that we want to know. Okay, so types of meetings. This is definitely one of the more playful parts of this, I think, but I still think these are valuable things to know if you're going to be in tech. All right, so team stand-ups. Team stand-ups are probably going to be daily, and sometimes they're called daily stand-ups or whatever. When we used to be in the office, we used to stand up physically as we did this. And I loved that, because if we made you stand up and you were a heavy-set, long-winded engineer, by making you stand up, you wouldn't talk more than you needed to because you wanted to sit back down in your chair. So I always thought that was kind of funny. So what is the thing that we need to know from a stand-up? There's 3 things you need to do, and 3 things, or if I want to be like Wayne, the 3 things you need to know are this. What did you do yesterday? What are you doing or planning on doing today? And what are your blockers? So what are you doing yesterday? What did you, and typically with that, it's what you accomplished, not just what you were working on. If you're just piddling around on stuff and didn't really get anything done, a lot of times that's not really something you need to mention. You just let it ride. I'm still working on whatever. But what are you working on today? This is where your management, and typically you have your line code or your regular manager in there, and then also like a project manager or an agile manager in there. And what'll happen is they should, if they have higher priorities than whatever you think you should be working on, they should redirect you right then. Hey, that's really good. I'm glad that you're working on that. That needs to take a back seat to this, because this is the critical thing that you need to be working on today. Okay. You're the manager. You guys have paid for my time. I will switch, whatever. You don't want to hear that like halfway through the day. You want to hear that very early on in the day. And then this is another thing, then what are your blockers? So blockers can be things like, hey, I'm on the Linux team, right? And I got a question last Monday from the networking team, and the networking team asked me about something that they needed to know from our Linux department, and I sent them back. So this was last Monday, and I sent them on at noon. So within 4 hours, I sent them back all the stuff they asked for, and I haven't heard back from them. And now it's Tuesday of the next week. That's a blocker because we're working on this project together, and I have not gotten an acknowledgement for that, even though I've sent, another email to their manager on Thursday, to them and their manager. And I need somebody to move this. A good manager or a good project manager will take that as an action right then, and that will be something they work on that day, because engineers shouldn't be. And I hate to say it like this because it almost sounds like you think you're like royalty and you're too good for stuff. Like, I'm an engineer and I just walk around like this and people move stuff out of my way. That's not really the point. The point is sometimes I can't move anything anymore without getting loud. And I tell people all the time, I'm not going to lose my cool as an engineer. I'm not going to like get in meetings and be like, you fucking assholes. I don't do that stuff. I don't care. Like, I'm not going to argue. But I think my managers should do that because they that's their job. I think they should move stuff out of my way for me so that I can, in some ways, just walk around like, oh, I'm the engineer. But the point is, I'm focused on the thinking about the thing. I shouldn't be thinking about all the blockers in the way, if that makes sense. And honestly, most of the time when that happens, somebody just missed the email, something like that. It's not always that big of a deal. But I'll tell you, like, if you're an engineer and you got your head down for 4 or 5 days and you pop it up just to say, well, this has been blocking me, sometimes you are going to block. I know guys who just get fucking mad in meetings, and I'm like, why are you losing your cool, bro? But it's like that was the only thing that mattered to them. But if they had just let their management handle it, they could have kept their cool and just kept going about. So my point is, it's not always like you can't always think that somebody's being malicious towards you. Other engineers are also busy on other stuff as well. So anyway, so this is team stand-up. There's 3 things. What did you do yesterday? What are you working on today? What are your blockers? Very, very useful to just kind of see what's going on. Then there's another thing that you're going to run into, and operations teams have to do this. So even if you're an admin on an operation team, you're going to do engineering change boards. They're also sometimes called CABs, which are change advisory boards. There's a whole bunch of terms for them. And what they are is we want to make a change to an operational system. We need to do it in a controlled fashion that doesn't break the system, especially in prod. So what ends up happening in an engineering change board or a change advisory board is we go in and we plan out a change and we submit it to the change management team, who then forwards it to the managers who own the systems that we're going to be touching. The teams that are going to be involved are going to be kind of alerted through whatever our processes are. People use tools like ServiceNow for this. I think OTRS can do this. There's other tools that'll do this as well. But they're going to go through and they are going to alert everybody, and everybody's going to be able to come on that day for the engineering change board, change advisory board, and they're going to give their why we should do it or why we shouldn't, why it needs to be in a downtime window, why it could be done during the workday or not. Like, there's all kinds of things that we have to sit around and plan about. There are routine changes that happen that sometimes can be approved without this board. And then there's more complex changes, what we call standard or critical changes that happen outside of it. There's also typically emergency changes that we just do in the heat of it, and then we write up the change after. That's typically an emergency change request. But anyways, change engineering boards review the changes in the system. That's all they do. And one of the reasons this is so useful, like I've always been the Linux guy or the platform guy. Platform was when I was in charge of everything, but Linux was, when I was just doing Linux side. But I still want to be there when the networking team is talking about firewall changes, because I have systems that are over here in the normal environment and in the PCI environment. So if they're going to be making firewall changes, I need to know that because it's going to affect the way that like my satellite system works. So I actually had an example of this years ago, and this is something that we solved kind of through this process. But let's see if this pops up still. So if we were putting Satellite on a system, so Satellite is a Red Hat tool, right? And Red Hat has, when you go into Satellite 6 is the current one, these are all the ports that need to be open so Satellite server gets talked to by the different server. Basically, they use it as the repo. So it pulls down from the active Red Hat repos, and then you lock in and do life cycles and stuff. Don't get into all that right now. But the point is, our teams were, so we had one satellite server, but then that wasn't in the PCI environment. Then the PCI environment is over here. That's payment card industry. That's a very specific set of like security standards. And we needed to be able to talk to the capsule servers, which are the downstream from the satellite, so that our servers could update out of them in the PCI environment, right? And what happened was they blocked a bunch of these other ports, which makes sense. You're going to block off ports that don't need to be open in a firewall environment. If you're firewalling off the environment to meet PCI standards, then you can only have the open ports that had been requested. Now, we had requested all these ports 5+ years before, but they had been lost, right? They'd been lost. So then there was a little bit of a fight between the teams where it's like, we need you to open these ports. And they're like, you need to put in a new request. And we're like, that request was already there. And they're like, it didn't get captured. So we just, to keep the peace, we did it. But the point is, the reason that this is so important is because I was sitting in those change environment boards or change advisory boards, engineering change boards. I heard that the networking team was doing all these things. We didn't catch it at the time because, again, they mentioned all the ports that were already requested would stay open. They didn't mention ones that were over 5 years. My point is, I knew that was coming. And then when it did happen, because I remember getting called out for this, then it's like, hey, I'm on the call late at night. Hey, didn't networking just do something? Hey, we need these ports open now. So we got the ports open, right? The networking team came back on, got the ports open. And then what we did was we did a like an emergency change request after the fact and said, hey, reopen these ports for us, right? There was a little pushback because, like, obviously we didn't want to do it because they should have been open anyways. But it's one of those things where these are really good for, like, if you want to feel the pulse of your system, like, where is your system at? What's happening? How organized are other teams? And what kind of things are happening? This is a really good way to kind of know what's going on inside of IT. So I tell people all the time, when you're new to the company, even if you're not invited to the environment change or the engineering change board, or they call this a bunch of different terms. Write it, like get in that meeting, find out who's got that meeting, find out if you can get an invite to it, because oftentimes they'll have like 60-70 people in. They're big meetings in bigger companies, but you can just sit like a little fly on the wall and listen to what's going on, and it's very valuable to you. I think it's valuable in your career. Hear what other departments and different teams are doing. Okay. Operations meetings tend to be every morning, and they are the state of operations in your company. So I mentioned at the beginning of this section that the operations teams are where you tend to get on, and operations are all the activities that are going on in the company. How much uptime do we have? How are our key performance indicators? What's our storage look like? What's our usage? How many users got into our systems? This kind of stuff. And operations meetings tend to be daily, every morning. How is the system operated for the last 24 hours, right? There will be any kind of things that have happened. And often operations meetings will also review changes that happen. So if changes happen during like a change window at night, then they will come in and they'll say, okay, these changes were successful. This change was backed out as unsuccessful because of this, this, and this. They need to go back and look at it again. And it kind of reviews all of the operations of the system. Main one, again, being how much has the system been up? Have we taken any downtime that's going to, look bad to our customers, look bad to our internal reporting, that kind of stuff. So operations meetings, you'll get called into often. The more of a lead you are, so, the more of like a tech lead or the lead on the team, you're going to want to be in there. But often this is another one of those meetings where I would just sit in even if there was nothing going on with my team, because I wanted to hear how the other teams were having problems. Look, everybody's always alert on these ones because you get called. We call it getting called out on the mat, right? You get called out and you just get trounced a little bit for how well your team did. You have to answer questions often when there's an incident, when something goes wrong. The questions are, what went wrong? What did we do to resolve it? And what could we do to prevent it from happening again? Right? What are the gaps, right? And that's kind of a quick version of another meeting that we're going to do here in a second, which is a performance review. But operations meetings are looking at the state of operations for the last 24 hours. Sometimes, typically on like Monday mornings, if they're going to do it, they will do like a roll up of the weekend and maybe the week before, and just, hey, what's been well, what hasn't been working well, this kind of stuff. Okay, so that's your operations meetings. Then performance reviews. Performance reviews come, I really should have split this out because there's two things that I kind of want to talk about for performance reviews. One is there really should be an after action review. So after action reviews are those ideas that when you're done with a project, especially a big project, you should go back through and look at what went well. Well, our team performed well. We did our storming, norming, performing, all that stuff. You guys have ever heard that with teams? We did all that stuff very quickly. We got to being a functional team. We got everything done. We made some assumptions early on about capacity that weren't accurate, so we had to buy more stuff, whatever. So an after action review is sometimes called a post-mortem, and it's this idea that we go back and look at how well the project was run, how well some deployment happened, and then we just talk about the good things and bad things. And the best way to run one of those is to be honest about it. It's to like look it directly in the face and say, hey, we performed really shitty in this way. You don't have to say shitty if you don't want, but we were performed really poorly here. And the way we get better at this is we need to start that documentation earlier. We need to have a formal set of documents so that it's not just somebody giving us notes and then we find out 3 weeks in that we didn't really have a good handle on what was happening, right? We need to do that better from the start, right? We need to have controls in place for that. And that's what an after action review is. The other type of performance review, the one that I actually meant when I wrote this slide, was you are going to get reviewed for your performance. And typically, performance reviews like that come a couple of different ways. One, you're going to have what's called one-on-ones with your manager. One-on-ones should happen at least monthly, but some people like to do one-on-ones. I don't like one-on-ones once a week with management. I'm like, it's too much. I don't want to talk to you that much. Most people like one-on-ones at least every month. And what you should be bringing to those one-on-ones is what you've accomplished for the last month. That's a good thing to bring. And then your management should be bringing to that, what they should be telling you about is what you've been doing well, what they've noticed, what they've been told by other people, that kind of stuff, what other teams you've worked with, and what they think you can improve on, right? And these are kind of like little micro adjustments throughout the year. For your big one, at the end of each year, we always have a bigger performance review called an annual review. Most engineers have it. Most operational team members have it. And what that one's the one that's actually typically for your bonuses and your promotions. So I always tell people it's your responsibility to keep track of what you do. This is maybe one of the most important things I can tell you today, especially if you're already in tech. The company doesn't keep track of what you do. Like most people think like they do, but no, you need to actually come, and it's almost like you're re-interviewing. You need to show them all the things that you delivered for the year and why you deserve that raise or why you deserve that 5 out of 5 for performance review, which looks good and then allows you to move to other roles or allows you to get promoted or those kind of things. That's on you. That's your responsibility to keep track of. And I know that kind of sucks because you're like, oh man, I thought my manager did that. Your manager's too busy putting out fires and dealing with the, Pareto's rule, 20% of people that are, sniveling and whining all the time. They're dealing with that kind of shit. They're not keeping track of what you're doing for your performance reviews. That's on you. And I know for some people that's probably like a little bit of a slap in the face and a warm up, but or for a wake up, but it's definitely on you to make management see the value of you. And you might say, and trust me, guys, I was very much this other way when I started. I was like, no, they should appreciate me. They put me on all the Tiger teams. I did all this stuff. I worked on all this stuff. I was always fixing stuff. They should know that. But then I realized nobody knows or cares that. You have to keep track of that yourself. So I did that very poorly early on in my career. That actually affected me in some ways. And if I'm being honest about it, it did actually keep me, I don't want to say down, but it affected my tenure at Lockheed Martin for sure. And this is something that you should acknowledge, right? You should think about it. My after action review on that was I didn't do great in that. Now I'm much better at that. I can prove all the things that I've done and all the things that I'm good at, and then show the company those kind of things. Okay, so performance reviews. The other one, I had one more with that. Oh, yeah, the other one that I didn't mention. So you have your management meetings every month, hopefully, where you do one-on-ones with your management. There's another type of one-on-one with management that's called a skip level. Now, the skip level goes 1 or 2 levels above your manager. So it's either your manager's manager or the director above them, or C level. Sometimes I've had C level skip levels. So C levels are like your CISOs and your chief information officers and those kind of guys. And that's CISO, right? Chief Information Security Officer, Chief Information Officer. I've never dealt with a financial officer, but I have friends that do. Skip levels are when you deal with them and maybe they just want to sit down. They'll do like a coffee time or something like that, where They call in 8 people from different teams, and it's almost like, honestly, it's almost like Festivus. If you guys know what Festivus is, it's from the old show Seinfeld, and it's like it's the airing of grievances. I've got problems with all of you, and I'm going to do it. And what I've always tried to do in those is it's not that you can't turn that into just an airing of grievances up, above your manager. You go up a couple levels, and you can it's kind of like they want to hear from the troops, like what's going on in the trenches. And you can turn that into a gripe session. You really you obviously could. But what I always like to do was say what my team members were doing that they were doing well, and what I thought my team was doing well, and what I thought my team could be doing better. I didn't like to just turn it into like, you know what, we get shit on all the time by this other team, because like that's what these people hear all the time, right? I mean, that's what skip levels mostly are. And if you guys have been in them, you've probably heard it, where it's like people just they're like monkeys with shit. They just start throwing shit at each other, and you're like, oh God, are we really doing this? I'm trying to like sit here and have a good conversation. What I tried to always focus on was like, what was my team doing well? I tried to call out members of my team, because they'd often bring me up because I was like the lead, so they'd make me go to those things. And trust me, I don't want to be in any of these meetings. I'm just telling you about them because in tech you are going to be in these types of meetings. Yeah, Festivus for the rest of us. That's exactly right. So performance reviews, when I do this presentation next in 2 weeks, I might break this performance reviews out to all those different ones I just talked about, because that would actually be a good thing. Remember, this is kind of like my practice run through, although this will be recorded, so you guys can look at this later if you want. So then there's Tiger teams. Tiger teams are probably where I've spent the bulk of my career. I think that this is one of those things that has, and again, to not break my arm patting myself on the back, this is one of those things that has really made me stand out in my career, is I'm always the guy pulled in on these. Tiger teams are, you've got a very focused, very specific type of thing wrong in your system that needs to be addressed now. There is a criticality of the system's broken in some way, and there is an urgency that the system has to get back on track. We're losing our critical path, and we're pushing out projects, and we're pushing out the capability of doing some things. Maybe we're limping along right now with some kind of shunt in place, or what we call a workaround for a problem, but we must address it in an engineering fashion, and we have to get it done. That's what a Tiger team does. And I know they're the stupidest names, and we're always like, Tiger team, rawr, like it's stupid, right? But this is a place where like the people who are going to deeply think about this stuff and know the disciplines around get in, and they do stuff like, up there I put a fishbone diagram, or what's called an Ishikawa diagram, right? And it's a diagram where we look at the inputs to a output, and we figure out where the breakdown is occurring. Is it people? Is it processes? Is it a machine or a system, right? If we're dealing with real parts. If we're dealing with physical versus virtual hosts, then we're talking about capacity of back-end planes. There's all kinds of things that can happen, right? Are we talking about our so they talk about measurement here, the capability of our systems to track, our monitoring to track if an issue is starting to happen or go off the rails. There's all kinds of things. And honestly, nowadays with systems, a lot of people are like, just throw more capacity at it, throw more servers behind the load balancer at it. But that's not always the right answer, because you can do that, right? You can throw more front-end systems and think that it's the web tier that's giving you, front-end access. Oh, TLS terminations were causing problems, this and this and this. But then you go to find out, when you really dig in, that it wasn't your TLS terminations. It was actually maybe your application tier wasn't able to scale or wasn't able to handle it. And you say, well, Scott, what are you talking about? Aren't you just a Linux guy? That's all this like upper level like DevOps and SRE stuff. And I say, yeah, but I still get called in on these, because the troubleshooting is the troubleshooting, right? Like if you get good at the process of working through things, and if you know things about stuff and you know how to go check things, you can start to get better at these processes. And again, you'll just get called into these things. People just be like, hey, that guy is good at fixing stuff. He's going to call him in every time. And I tell you, it's like one of those things where like no good deed goes unpunished. You get known as the person who solves problems, you're going to get called in all kinds of these. But Tiger teams often, when they solve stuff like that, excuse me, they can be really good for like bonuses and stuff. If your company has like bonus programs and stuff, because you'll get like thanks and kudos from other managers and stuff like that, and it always looks good. But Tiger teams are going to be, and getting invited to those is going to be directly related to how well you do your troubleshooting. And I have all kinds of talks on troubleshooting. You can go spend hours on that if you want. If you need those, just let me know down in the Discord later, and I'll show you guys where those all are. But it's this idea that we've got a persistent, nagging, chronic problem and we have an urgency to resolve that problem. That's what Tiger teams get called up for. They are very short-lived teams. They sometimes only run for one session if you get to the bottom of it. Sometimes they run daily, and they are the only thing that needs to be done until that gets solved. And they're very urgent teams. But you will run into them in your IT career. All right. Types of managers, man. You're going to have all kinds of managers. And when I say types, I don't mean type A and type B. Like if you go take a leadership course or a management course, you'll hear about the laissez-faire manager and the hands-on manager. And there's terms all over the place. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the actual types of managers you're going to run into. There's line managers. Some people call these reporting managers. Some people just call these my manager. This is the person that does your annual review, and this is the person that you report to day to day. In my case, this is often the guy who has hired me directly to be his team lead. The last 12 years that I've been team lead everywhere I've been, this guy has called me up and brought me to them. The different people I've known that have been managers have wanted me to work for them. So they typically know you pretty well. But your line managers are going to be the people, they're going to do drive-bys. Mine sat directly behind me. They're going to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I need this information right now. And they set your, I should have put this on here. They're the ones that above all else set your priority. If they set your priority, they typically trump all the other ones here. Well, with the exception of like directors and urgency. Project managers and agile scrum managers, I'll be honest, I don't know what any of them do, but they're going to ask you things like, hey, what deliverables have been met, or if timelines are still tracked or have slipped. And I'll tell you, project managers and agile managers will invite you to meetings that I highly advise as an engineer you learn how to push back on. Well, once you get into engineering, administration, just go do it. But when you're like an engineer, I push back on them all the time because they will ask me for a synopsis. And then I'll go in that meeting and I'll just hear them say the synopsis. And then sometimes people will ask a question and they'll just look at you anyways. And you're like, oh my God, why am I even here? Because all they're going to do is just repeat what you said anyways. So I try to stay out of those meetings with those guys. But project managers and agile scrum managers, they're really dealing with like timelines and projects. And I tell people often, just get used to giving them like just the facts, like just the high level facts. The system was down for 3 hours. We got the system back up and running. No, it won't happen again because we have this monitoring in place. The monitoring had been turned off by the monitoring team a few weeks earlier because it was alerting. We need to make sure that they know not to do that, this and this and this, right? You just give them the facts. If you do anything like this, if you send them something like this, right? If you send them something like that, just expect their eyes to glaze over and they'll probably lean back in their chair and they won't understand any of it. But if you tell them, now the system is cleared up and it's only 57% usage and we've got plenty of capacity for the next 3 weeks and we'll have monitoring in place so it doesn't happen again, that's cool to them. But I'm not trying to say that they're not capable. I'm just saying they don't care about the tech. Does that kind of make sense? Your manager's probably closer to the tech than you because he or she probably came from being a Linux administrator or something like that, or a security person. But these people are just like, they're just assigned over you. Like they're just herding you like little cats around. They don't really know. I said herding, not hurting, although they do hurt you sometimes. Anyways, I'm losing it because I've been talking for 2 straight hours. Yeah, project managers, they want to know about deliverables. They care about timelines. They want to make sure if you're still on track or if you're slipping. I like to let them know as early as possible if something's going to slip, because then you don't have to explain it to them later. And by the way, they will always come at you hard if they do. Red, blue, tiger. Yeah. Tiger teams are different. Red and blue are more security focused if you're thinking of those type of teams, but tiger's a little different. Now directors, hold on. Directors, they want to know typically like capacity stuff and typically like over a month. They want to know like how much usage has increased in the last 6 months on the system or 3 months, how long until the storage solution runs out of space. And directors often won't come directly to you unless they can't find your manager. So like I would sometimes get questions like this from upper level directors because they knew that I could typically give them the right answers. We typically give them reports, not dashboards. You don't expect like those type of managers to log into stuff. Like you're not going to give them a Grafana dashboard. You may have the coolest dashboard, guys, that they could stretch all over and look back for years on problems. Nope. They're not going to go play around in dashboards. They have enough other stuff on their minds. But if you give them a report of that dashboard, like a PDF that's generated maybe on a Friday each week, or maybe daily if they care about uptime that much, you can basically feed them the information that they want so that they can put in their cool little PowerPoint slides, and they can talk about the capacity of your systems and the trajectory of the expected, flow of data through your systems for the next 3 months. And they're cool as shit. They don't care about any of that stuff. I don't mean that they're always cool. What I mean is, like, they don't really want to bother you. They don't want to interact with you. You don't want to interact with them. They're basically slumming it to even come down and talk to us engineers. So we just give them what they need and, like, let them go. Yeah, they need the KPIs. Yeah, they need to know how well we're going to do it. And a lot of times directors care, like our manager cares about, like, direct key performance indicators. Directors kind of care that we're going to be able to keep doing it in the future for, like, forecasting, which honestly, a lot of times forecasting is like, if everything's the same, did I put on here? If we have the same usage, or if we're increasing usage. So now you have to know a little bit of, like, basic math to figure some of that stuff out. Maybe some, like, forecasting stuff. If you got your little financial calculators, if any of you remember how to do that. If you haven't done that, well, there's all kinds of stuff online that can show you how to do it nowadays. But back in my day, we had to learn to do it by hand on a cocktail napkin. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that bad. Nowadays, there's all kinds of tools that'll help you learn what that stuff means. All right, so those are types of managers. That's not exhaustive. You're going to have other types of managers, but those are the main ones that I've seen in my career. All right, this one's important because this is about you as an engineer and as an admin, right? And this is something that I often tell junior engineers, because I have to correct them, and I'm going to show you guys some of the ways I've had to correct them. I also have to correct college students on this one. This may be one of the most important things I can show you, right? Engineers deal in precision. That's what they deal in. We try to be as precise as possible, and then we also deal in truth. What I mean by that is we want to tell that accurate measurement or accurate thing we know to other people accurately. We don't, well, obviously we don't want to lie to people, but I guess some people do. But we set values, and then we make sure that they are as we expect them to be. And then we report up, yeah, that's done. Yeah, that thing is set. Or yes, if you want. Yes, we have correctly built this part of the system. That project deliverable is done. We have an automation in place to always build it that way in the future. We've built 10 servers with that. We expect the next team that pushes the button to build a server will get that output and we'll validate that. Yes, that is set. That is good. Nobody that hears yes or something is set or valid or good from an engineer ever wants to hear later that it wasn't set or that it was busted. So that's why I say your really all of your currency, everything that you have of value, is how truthful you are and how accurate you are. And what I mean by that too, another way to think of that is if you don't deal in accuracy, if you don't tell people the truth, or if you are just constantly doing wrong shit, and in, like, late night meetings you're on the wrong servers and you can't log into stuff and you can't fix stuff, well, then what's going to happen is people are going to stop asking you stuff. People are going to stop trusting you for stuff. Your manager is going to go to other people, and they're not going to expect the correct answer from you because they don't get the right answer anyways. They always have to walk it back later when they find out that you didn't know what you were talking about or you were on the wrong system. It's just, could you see how in all these ways that would be very bad? So these are things that I think are very important. I think when you get called late at night, you should trust but verify what you're told by others. This is like, hey, I don't think that you're lying to me. I'm not saying you're lying to me. But if somebody tells me, like, my P01 Jumpo 2 server is down, and then I see that I'm on that server, and I see that its uptime is 77 days, I go, well, that server is up, right? And it's not that you have to challenge them in a call or make them look stupid in front of everybody. But I've often been called out for stuff like this, where they're like, some server or service is down, but then when I get on there, I see that the server's up, but they're like, oh, no, this service, this thing is up, or we can't ping it from this network. And you're like, well, that's different than it not being up, because I was able to get into it immediately. The server's been up for 77 days. It's different than having a whole host down. And any number of questions would you get to. So what I mean by that is, like, somebody tells you something's down, and then you say, no, that server's up. Can you clarify that? And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, our Java service is down. We can't get it to start. And then you go and you find out as often we do, that there was like 10 people from their team on it 3 hours ago at 11 o'clock at night on a Friday. And you're like, were you guys doing a change? And they're like, no, there's no change. There's no change on record. And you're like, but there were 10 of you on a Friday night on that server. You guys were definitely doing something on that server. And they'll, and then after a little while you go and you finally get to the answer and they're like, oh no, sorry, we were just doing a real quick redeploy of our code. And you're like, by the way, there's all kinds of Rails. There's all kinds of things that failed in place before that happened, if that did happen, but especially in a prod environment. But because you shouldn't be getting called out on the weekend for a dev environment for the most part. But has that scenario exactly like I just described happened to me more than once? Yes. And it goes back to something I said earlier where you're either the product or you're the cost center. Well, Linux team, we were the cost center at that time, and that team was one of the teams that was making money for the company. So they got all the passes and all the leeway, and they were like, oh, don't do that again, and just patting them on the head. And they're like, you stupid Linux team, why didn't you make their unauthorized change on a Friday night go better? And you're like, oh, motherfucker. Because like you're not the one making the company money. So anyways, I'm not bitter about it. It was a long time ago. But anyways, trust but verify. And then this is a big one for me. If I say something, right? If I go back to that example over here and I say, hey, we're at 52% capacity on that P01 Jump02 server in the root directory. The root directory is at 52% capacity. I will often just go like this and copy this right into my email. And you say, really? You do something like that? Yeah, I don't ever want to walk back from anything I said. I'm talking about the P01 Jump02 server. I'm talking about its root directory, and I'm talking about its percentage of usage right now as I just typed it into that system. And I go drop that on there. So then if somebody comes back later and goes, no, you told me that the P01 Jump01 server was at that. And I go, oh, no, that is not what you either asked me, I have it right here, or what I responded to you. I said the P01 Jump02 server, which is in a different environment. And yeah, if we were talking about that other server, we probably could have done that, right? But my point is, I don't like ever having to walk back anything I've said. And you might say like, oh, that's a certain bit of arrogance. It's not even necessarily that. It's just I don't like being incorrect. That goes back to this first one. So I also don't like having to walk things back because somebody changes what they asked me or because I was incorrect, because then we can look at it and I go, oh shoot, I was incorrect. And then I can be wrong. But I try not to do that, right? This is a thing that, again, we deal in precision, so we don't want to make a lot of mistakes. That's always going to be true of all tech. But you can't completely escape from mistakes, but you can kind of try to avoid them. So these are things that I think that you need to understand if you're going to go into tech. Another thing about it, your feelings. There's an old saying, F your feelings, right? The way you feel about something, this feels like that problem we had last week. That's a perfectly valid thing to think. That's probably even a perfectly valid thing for some admins or network operations people to say. But as you get over into engineering, you can think that all you want. But when you actually say it, you should have some information around it. And you should say, the behavior is the same as we saw last week in that the APIs used to give, there was a 98% 200 rate. Right now we're experiencing a 93% 200 rate and then a various version of other return codes coming back. And that is the same behavior as we saw last week. So this may be something related to that. That is better than saying this feels like what happened last week, right? Hopefully that makes sense to you. And if it doesn't make sense to you, mull about it for a little bit. Might sound perfectly normal to some people too, but engineers, like they hear like feel. This is the same thing of like doctorate students when you go and you do research and stuff, and then people start talking about how they feel, and you're like, how you feel is irrelevant. What does the data say? What are the data telling us about this, right? That goes on to this next part, which is, don't get into anti-methodologies. Anti-methodologies they're just bad. You back to that thing of getting called into tiger teams and stuff. If you want to be somebody who's known for like driving to a good solution and figuring things out, don't get into a lot of anti-methodologies. Don't just go flipping switches and, I just restarted all the services. That sounds wonderful, but that's not great in prod environments, just flipping services. You should go look at what's happening to the service. Is it getting overloaded? Because maybe you flip a service on and it works for 10 seconds before it starts failing again. And not to mention, you lost a bunch of connections. That's not great either. Now, granted, different organizations are at different levels of maturity in their, connections and their web apps and stuff like that. That's a different concept that's probably outside of your wheelhouse unless that's directly what you're doing. Spotlighting, only using tools you're familiar with. You're like, good old ls, I can ls everything on the system. Well, no, there's other commands than just ls, right? You got to know those. And then another one, I always tell my engineers, do not just get on calls and point at networking. Networking knows it's their fault. You don't have to point it out. Well, anyways, my point is like that's a great way to get people not to work with your team. And you really don't want that late at night, right? You just want to get done with the call and get back. And then this is another one, data to based observation. So this, the idea is learn how to interpret the data you're looking at, right? Understand the scope. If you're looking at a dashboard, right? If you're looking at a dashboard of a system, where's my dashboard at? Right here. If we're looking at a dashboard, I need to understand maybe the scope of what I'm looking at here. This over here is a real-time last slice of exactly what's happening on the system right now. This is not usage data back. This is the last slice of exactly what's happening. Oh, what the heck's going on Hostbox? Of my servers right now, right? Why is Hostbox so high? He's not even doing anything. And then over here, these servers, what are these servers doing? But also, if I go down a little bit, here is some capacity. Oh, those are empty. Here is some capacity stuff on my servers. And what's going on with this capacity? And could I make this longer? Could I make this the last 7 days to try to see, oh shoot, there was a capacity spike at some point on CPU of one of my servers. Could I go figure out what server that is, right? And go see what my capacity spike was on some system, right? So anyways, we're not necessarily going into that much, but what is the scope and the scale of what I'm looking at? If I look at a spike for the last 5 minutes, but then I back out for the last 30 days, does that spike become just a normal thing that's happened over time? Or is that something that really was a problem, right? And this is kind of an important thing. And then as you get into, we're not going to go into statistics right now, but mean, median, and mode, as well as distinct outliers, and then you start to get into like standard deviations from the mean, we can start to look at what is a normal output from a process and what starts to go above an upper or lower control limit. What is a true outlier and thing that can be ignored, or, these kind of things. Can we ever ignore an outlier? Sometimes you can't. But these are the things that only work if you really start to deal with your database observations. Now, we're not going to go into this right now, right? I'm not going to dig into this, but for people that want to get better at this, this is where your Six Sigma stuff comes in. I think Six Sigma is one of the best ways to enter into this kind of knowledge, because they look at processes and they think about how to make them incrementally better. Just smaller little things that are better based on observations. They will teach you how to do observations. They will teach you how to measure things, because that's what they do. That's all they do. So database observations will help you as an engineer. And I don't think anything that you study in that space will ever be wasted in your career. So I learned some of that stuff 20 plus years ago, and it's still super useful to me now, because it's always the same thing. Like, look at your data, see what the data are trying to tell you, try to interpret them correctly, right? Now, this is another one. This is what I was just showing a little bit ago. But this is something that actually this has come across my desk probably more than 20 times in my career. And I've had to go pull junior engineers aside and tell them that the first one is unacceptable. The first one, I've literally seen stuff like that sent in emails. Because if you do the normal formatting of like an Outlook email, for the average company, you got Outlook or something, that's what's going to happen. It's Calibri body. And it's going to take all of your formatting out of a terminal and go, and then, I don't know, can any of you guys read that? Right? I tell people often, like, I've been doing Linux a long time. I can't even read that. I know what that says, and I can't read that. Right? I know what this is supposed to be showing me, and I can't read it. But here's the same thing over here. And even if you sent this to a project manager, and then you just highlighted right here, you would be able to say, yeah, we're at 50% usage on our file system for root, and we should be good for the capacity increase that you guys expect over the next month or whatever, right? What's that? Mooncure, what did you say? Are you talking about the for data stuff? It's Six Sigma. So if you go look up like White Belt Six Sigma, that's a really good place to start. That's a free certification course that's out there. Yeah. Or Lean Six Sigma is, Six Sigma deals with process improvements in general. Lean Six Sigma deals with product improvements, but it's still process management. Like Lean Six Sigma would be more around like, hey, I'm building bikes and the chain of the bikes are always coming out one link too long. What's our process problem that's causing that? Oh, our machine is timed incorrectly. And that's where you would dig in more with like product, but both of them are going to deal with process and stuff. And they have free training out there through the Six Sigma Council. They're absolutely fantastic. So, and I would say they start you off with statistics light, and then they move you over into some heavier stuff. But anyway, so look at this. Like, I mean, honestly, we all know that this one looks better, but sometimes people just grab information and dump it out. And I tell people often, and I say this unironically, why didn't you just go like this? Why didn't you just like take a picture you going like this and just send it to them? Because honestly, that's what that says to me. Like it says I didn't even care enough to send you something accurate. But anyways, all right. So if it looks like if it comes out of a terminal format, like came out of a terminal, because that's how we like to read it. This is another one. Take pride in your work, man. This comes from a real assignment I was turned in many years ago at the college. I give this as an example often. Some of you have probably seen it. This is every piece of information there is accurate, 100% accurate. You can go you can go to CIDR.xyz. It's CIDR.xyz is a site where you could do, let me pull it up real quick. I show this to my students when they're first learning networking. This is a great little calculator. You can go put these values, go to CIDR.xyz if you want, and go put these values in there, and you will come out with the exact same numbers that he did. So if you said 192.168.5.0/25, if you went and put that in that thing, you would come out with all these numbers right here. This is a perfectly carved up, 1 bit borrowed from a /24 address to a /25, fixed length subnet masking, FLSM. That's everything in this is correct. But can any of you read that? Do I have any networking people here? Can any of you read that? No. This was turned in as a final project. And I was like, seriously? Anyway, so I didn't take any points off for this student, but I did tell him, like, hey, if you submitted this to like a company and they were planning to hire you or some other guy, do you think that they're going to look at that and go, man, this guy doesn't even understand how to format a table? Now, I'm not saying that you have to, like, guys, I'm not saying that like you can't have little mistakes in your stuff. I'm just saying, like, look at this and think, gosh, there's an old well, I should have put that I'll put a meme over this for later, but you guys know who Aqua Teen Hunger Force is? They're this old Comedy Central thing. Or Cartoon Network. Sorry, not even Comedy Central. They were Cartoon Network. And Shake looks at Meatwad in one of the episodes and goes, "You look at him and you tell me there's a God," right? And people turn that into a meme that says, when one of your coworkers can't do some simple thing, and he points at him and he says, "You look at him and you tell me there's a God." But anyways, this is kind of my thoughts on this. Like, geez, can we not do that? All right, I've beaten that dead horse enough. But take pride in your work. That's my point. Is make sure that you're talking to a person, and often you're talking to a person who doesn't understand networking. So if you're sending them something, make sure that it's reasonable. Okay, documentation. You're going to run into all kinds of documentation. I mentioned this earlier, where one of the things I think that you can really endear yourself to a team quickly if you're new to a team is go get into all the documentation and start updating things and fixing things. Look for old references and old versions of things. You see that you've updated all your Linux systems, but you've got old versions in there. Start to update things, and really documentation in general should be touched and updated within your organization at the maximum time of 6 months. You want to be updating documentation more than every 6 months. And some of you are very quickly going to go, man, that sounds really awful and really terrible. That's a lot of documentation, but that really is the way that it should go. When we do work, though, we have to apply documentation to our work activities, right? So as I'm fixing things or doing whatever and putting stuff in trouble tickets as I'm starting my career out, I need to take notes in the terminal as I go. So Screen or Tmux can log real time and keep logs of things for you. I think you should pull commands out that are relevant to what you did. Notepad++, OneNote, Obsidian, LogSec. There are all kinds of different notes all kinds of tools out there for you guys that are free or generally open source. I mean, OneNote is proprietary, but if you're in a Microsoft shop, you're probably going to deal with that. Then you go and you clean up and prepare that documentation. So you don't dump your whole text, your whole Tmux or screen session into a terminal, but you go and show the steps that you did or whatever. Maybe you learn some Markdown or other documentation standard for your team. If you're using something like ServiceNow, you might just drop it in there. But maybe you have like a Docu or a MediaWiki page. So you got a Wikipedia type page. If you guys have ever seen MediaWiki, a lot of times we run those internally to keep track of documentation. But learn how to do that. Some people do really good. One of our guys in our server, Kolkis, who runs the RHCSA, he does a really good Markdown notes for in his GitHub. So when he works through things with people, he gives them note links of all the stuff that he's worked on. And that's a really good skill to have, because being able to express yourself as an engineer, almost universally, you're not sitting here talking like this with me. You're going to actually be doing some type of email conversation or Teams or Slack or something. So learning how to do good documentation and sending concise emails, very important. And then once you've cleaned up and prepared like an initial documentation, especially if you're building things from scratch, you want to run redline operations over your documentation. What redline operations are is we built a server, we got it working to a point, we did all of our Ansible playbooks, so everything will go, and then we tear that server apart and we run it again. And when we redline operations in our document, if I start to build the server and the server stops at one point because it's like, Scott, actually no, here you need to input the vSphere center that we're going to connect to and add the server. And I go, oh yeah, no, sorry, I forgot to put that in my automation. I'll just go ahead and put it in right now. No, stop. In a redline operation, you cross that out and you go, I am effed right here if this was being run by one of my operations teams later and they're going to have to call me out late at night, or they're going to have to do something to get this to work. No, my whole automation is broken. I need to step back, so I tear the whole thing down again. I fix that part in my Ansible or whatever I'm doing, and then I run it again. And I run it again, and I neurotically run it again. Some of you guys have seen me build stuff where your redlining operation is till it can work as a normal tester or other operator running through it that doesn't know any of those things that you know. They don't know what the backend vCenters, or they don't know what the backend storage that you might be pointing to or get, that you're going to clone from. They don't know any of that. That can't be put into your automation as something that just, I'll just do this. No, you got to run through and redline your operations. Redline are where you allow something to run from start to finish without deviating from it. And if you deviate from it, you stop, you redline it. And if you can, like if it's in a virtual environment where you just blow it away and start over, you run through the whole thing again to there, and then you keep going. And redline operations are tedious. They are borderline neurotic, because you're just sitting there blowing a server away over and over again and rebuilding it until it's perfect. And until it meets most of your edge cases. But redlining is different than edge casing. But redlining is getting your documentation to where when I go hand this to some general operator, they can push the buttons and do all the things that I could have done as an engineer, and make it work without any deviation from what I gave them. This is very important internal to your teams, for one, but those people can call you out. This is extremely, very, very important if you're giving stuff to like a government customer or some customer outside of your organization. Your docs need to be good. Like, your stuff needs to work. If it breaks in some way, that's unacceptable, right? Like, that's unacceptable. Somebody's paying you money, you're probably going to get called out for that too. And then procedure training, you need to, write things up and assume that people have no knowledge of the system, even if they have root level operation. There's people on my teams that are off doing other things and they don't know the things that I know. So I need to assume that they don't know those things and aren't going to maybe necessarily check them. So I need to write things like that. And then I'm a big fan of, when I document things, I often use absolute pathing, so that even if somebody managed to avoid, they'll violate where you're at in your stuff. They'll go and CD somewhere, or they just leave and come back and start over, and they're not in the right directory. Well, absolute pathing can help with that. There's also setting of variables and that kind of stuff. But again, if somebody leaves your script and comes back, they're probably leaving their terminal, so they're going to lose whatever things you made them create earlier. So oftentimes I say, I'm a big fan of absolute pathing in systems, especially if you've created all the paths as part of it. Now, that's not a hard, fast rule. That's one of those ones you got to kind of suss out in your career. But this is a thing that I kind of say. All right. I'm a big fan of never starting from a blank page. Even if you're really experienced, even if you know how to write documentation, there are all kinds of policy docs out there that you can find. SANS.org has a really good one. I pull this up often. Hyper said, how's my PhD journey going? I just finished my second to last class. I have one more class. I'm either going to defend my dissertation by the end of 2026, or it'll be early 2027 when I finish it. So It's going. It's going. It's just going slow. If I don't finish it in 2026, I'll have to take one more class and do it in 2027. So, but I do plan on finishing it here soon. Topic is on Bastion nodes and Bastion security. So, but obviously when it's published, everybody can read it, and I'll send it to you guys if you want to. But yeah, it's not ready just yet. But anyway, so SANS.org, great place to start for policy docs, and also this IJIS.org, NIST policy templates. This will be available when we do the thing in 2 weeks. But if anybody needs any of these, just let me know down in Discord and I'll link them to you. But the way the policy docs look is something like this. You just drop in here, and here's all of your NIST policy templates. And you say maybe, what is our incident response going to look like? And here's my incident response doc. They just come in as a docx. So here's your risky click of the day. Are you just going to open it? Here's what a doc might look like. And I actually have one of these on the next slide, so we won't look at that one too deeply. But the point is, don't start from a blank page. Go find something that's out there and then modify it for what you need, right? And then there's some procedural templates. So if you want to write procedures for how people check out servers or that kind of stuff, there's an ultimate list of SANS cheat sheets out there. Those are not all the way there, but they show you a good outline for like, hey, you should be looking in var log messages. You should be probably running some greps over kernel errors, or like one of the things, like if somebody was telling me, hey, I'm having a problem with my HBA card on a server that I just installed 8 servers with HBA cards. I just went and turned them off, put the HBA cards in. 7 of them came up fine, but the 8th one didn't. What should I be doing, Scott? Well, I think most people that are doing that probably would know what to do, but I would go and I would look on the servers that it came up on, and I would do like a demessage, because they all turned on, right? Demessage, see where the errors are. I would go on that other server and do a demessage grep for like errors. And I do my LSPCI, and almost universally, you're going to see that that card wasn't seeded well if all the other servers came up correctly. And then, I'd go look in like LS mod, see what modules have loaded. But mostly I'm going to look at how the server booted up and what its actual systems it sees connected to its board, right? So there's stuff like that where you can go and from a procedural template figure out how you might want to check your stuff out. Anyways, that's better to me in my mind than going through and starting from scratch. All right, guys, real quick, I'm gonna take a break. Let's go hourglass. Just take a break. Go walk it out for a few minutes. I'm gonna say quick break and stretch your legs, right? And we'll say 8 minutes is good. 8 minutes, take a break real quick. Let me go to streaming, turn that off, go here. All right, I'll be right back, and then we'll continue on. All right, give you guys a few more minutes. I'm back, but I will wait right here for you. Excuse me. Turn my camera back on. Give it a couple more minutes here. And we'll get going. I guess people watching later can just skip over the hourglass. But for you guys here watching it live, you get to just deal with it. When we do this in 2 weeks, it'll be probably about a 4-hour, probably a little over a 4-hour workshop. So if people come, you're going to be working with people, you're going to be talking through all the same stuff, but it's going to be a lot of kind of work. And then the exclamation mark Ranger. Yeah, Ranger passed away July 3rd of last year, so we haven't had Ranger for a while now. He's just old. You know, he made it. I think he was almost 14. So yeah. Oh, we still love Ranger though. He was a good dog. And then we have another dog that we sometimes dog sit for from the in-laws named Lily. I get pictures of her every now and then. I throw her up in the Discord. So yeah, we're a big dog family around here. The wife likes cats too, but we mostly have dogs when we have them. But yeah, we don't have one right now. So I always tell her I want to get like 2 huskies, and she's like, no, not in Phoenix, because Phoenix has been 114 we hit 114 yesterday, which was a record for yesterday. That's in Fahrenheit for people outside of the U.S., which is, I don't know, you do that conversion, I think it's pretty hot. It was a record for us in Phoenix, so. All right. We'll let that timer run down. I'm just gonna let the timer run down because sometimes people use that to go take breaks and get coffee or something. So we'll give them some time. Yeah. But yeah, these document templates, I often cite these as useful. I just recently found this one, which is kind of cool. It's got all these different NIST policies, and the point isn't to you don't have to take it exactly. It's just find things that are pretty close. Oh yeah, it would be over 130 in your car. Yeah, there's I didn't have my truck even outside yesterday. I don't think I even left the house yesterday. But yeah, you can't touch the steering wheel. You can't touch metal. It's way too hot. You'll burn yourself. Like you can't let the steering wheel slide back through your hand. You know, if you're holding your steering wheel and you like turn and then you kind of hold it and let it slide through your hand, it puts too much heat into your hand. I've actually had this happen. It feels like you cut yourself on your steering wheel because there's so much heat in your hand just from just like the hard plastic of like a Chevy truck. But as it slides through your hand, it's just so much heat coming in. It feels like you're cutting yourself. It's kind of wild. Yeah. And that's why a lot of people will get those little like steering wheel covers or whatever. So, but I don't park my truck outside very often. My truck is very pampered and just sits in the. My truck just sits in the garage all the time. All right. Well, because I work from home, right? I just take it to the gym in the morning, go wrestle, and then I come home, and it stays inside pretty much all day. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop this. We're at 40 seconds, so that gives people a little bit more time to show up. But just to recap kind of this, like you never start from a blank page. It's very hard, even if you know what you're doing, just to open up a blank page and say, okay, I'm gonna just go. That's not a great use of your time. Also, it's not a great use of your junior engineers' time who don't have the experience you have. So make some templates of the documentation you guys work with. Show them how you build your templates and how you start your documents. Always have like the purpose of the doc, who the author was, right? I'm gonna actually show you this here in a second, but it's like, because then it shows somebody, who's in charge, who's responsible for it, where I might be able to find more information about it. Maybe it's some keywords or meta tags at the top. So if somebody's searching through your wiki, they can get to it pretty quickly. Yeah, Hyper. So I almost always have physically gone to my servers, but in the last like 5 years, I don't really go to the servers much anymore. But I will tell people anytime I'm doing maintenance on a server, so if I'm touching the server in a way that deals with power, networking, or any type of like security access, I always have another way into the server. So like, whereas like in this server, let's say I was doing something to P01 Jump 02 right now. I was doing something to the server. I would also have a way into that server through the console. So I have an XCP NG tool, right, which is my console for that. And I would jump into this server, and then for P01 Jump 02, I would make sure that I had, if I were to come over here, I could go to him here and go into his console. So then if I locked myself out here, or I broke the networking or did whatever, I would be able to reboot it here. Now, if this then broke, yeah, I would have to have hands in a data center. Sometimes you have hands in a data center, they'll go reboot stuff or restart it. But for me, it would be walking over to the my room next door, because I'm in my office, and then I have in my gym. That's where my little server, my half rack is, and then I would have to kill it there. But there's no physical box, so I would probably actually have to do something to this whole server if I couldn't get that unstuck in whatever way I needed to. But no, to answer that question, I will always have a secondary way into a server. If I'm doing any of those areas, it's often good to know how to get into your servers anyways. When they're virtual, you get in through the Type 1 hypervisor console. And then if they're physical, a lot of times you'll have an IPMI link in where you can get to the server, you can add disks to it, you can do stuff like that remotely. Sorry, add disks. I mean, add ISOs, like if you wanted to install something, or you can also reset it at like a platform level if you needed to. So there's that. Okay. So don't start from a blank page. Policies, there's a hierarchy to them, right? From upper level management, you often get like guiding principles, like fundamental philosophies or beliefs, right? And these things are coming down from, they're pushed down from upper levels. And then there's policies, right? And they're the directives that are codified organizational requirements. So policies will be things like, we will use, if we are using 802.11 wireless, right? So 802.11, maybe X-ray or something, we're using that type of wireless. Then when I say X-ray, I mean the letter X, right? Not actual X-rays, but then we will use at least this level of security. We will use at least, at minimum, it will be connected to its own VLAN, and that VLAN will be routed directly to the internet, with an exception of certain authenticated traffic can maybe come into some other area, but typically that's non-routable into the rest of our corporate network. So there's stuff like that, right? And that may be part of a policy, but policies, even if they said that, even if they said all of that stuff, guiding principles, we will run secure wireless and we will adhere to PCI DSS standards. Well, that's really cool. And that, yeah, thanks, buddy. But policies then are exactly how we're going to implement some of those things, right? Like we're going to at a very high level say we'll use 802.11x. We'll meet these like basic standards or whatever. Standards are written into your policies, right? And then what'll happen is then we'll have like baselines, and they're an aggregate of minimum implementation standards. So baselines often come from STIGs standards. So you've got the STIGs, which are the Secure Technical Implementation Guides, or maybe from CIS benchmarks. And that's how we're going to build all our servers to that STIG standard. Now that right there, when you do that, right, and then you have a baseline tool like that, that will often adhere to a policy. The policy says something like, we will adhere to PCI DSS standards. Well, PCI DSS standards have 12 outlined things that you must do. If you guys have never seen them, feel free to throw them in your little bot there or whatever AI you're using, and ask it, hey, what are the PCI DSS standards? There's 12 of them, 12 things you have to do, right? And then they break out into procedures and things that you're going to do as you deploy your servers or as you write up your documentations, line by line instructions for how we built those things. Procedures that we often do on the engineering side of things are build books and run books. How did I build this server and how did I prove all those things are good? And then run books are, how do we operate the server? How do we turn it on? How do we do maintenance on it? Make sure its services are started? How do we check it out when it has come up from what we call a cold boot or bare metal, right? And then plans are tactical guidelines, strategic things that we execute to respond to a situation. So there's two types of plans that you typically want to have for sure, ready to go. One for sure is your run books, right? So, if we're all the way down on bare metal, how do we bring it up? And then we need to have some type of incident response plan. Incident response plans tend to be the same, whether they're security incident response or just regular IT incident responses, with the distinction that the reporting that you're going to go up to is going to be different. So plans are, we practice, walk through things. We do, we'll actually have what we call roundtable meetings, and we'll say, okay, all of the hardware is up in the data center. Network has validated that all of their routes are good. Linux team, what are you doing? And then it'll pop over to me and I'll go, I'll wipe some crumbs off my mouth or whatever, and whatever I've been doing. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, sorry. We have initiated startup of all our servers. We expect them to be up in the next 12 minutes. I'll give a report, this and that, right? And you actually walk through. These meetings take a long time because you actually walk through exactly what your team would be doing. And in some cases, when you have small enough environments or right before something goes production, sometimes we get to walk through these for real at least once. I did these a few years ago. I was out in Hawaii training one of our customers on this high performance compute system we had built. And the last thing we did before it went live, they had done all their acceptance testing. They had done all this stuff. And it was funny. I was in the training. It was a 4-day training, Monday through Thursday. And then me and the wife were staying out for Friday and Saturday too, to just kind of hang out in Hawaii because obviously they had sent us out there. And on that last day, they were like, hey, you have this procedure in here for like bare metal startup. Can we just turn the whole system off and turn it on? And I was like, yes, we can. So that's what we did. We turned the whole system off, brought it all the way down to bare metal cold. The server room was quiet. We turned everything on from scratch, walking through the procedure. It was a great chance to redline the procedure, by the way, too, if anything was busted. And then we kind of went from there. Do I talk to Windows team? Yeah, Hyper. I've been the platform lead for both Linux and Windows before, although I don't advertise often that I've done that for Windows. But yeah, I've maintained over 3,000 Linux Windows servers as well. So I've done the biggest. Well, I've been in bigger environments than HPC, but the biggest environment I've done outside of government was about 5,000 nodes, and 3,500 of them were Windows, and 1,500 of them were Linux environment. So yeah. There's multi environments all the time. Yeah. Absolutely. You got to play well on the Linux side. You got to be able to play well with other tools often because companies will have processes that must go through those Windows systems. So yeah, they exist. Yeah, 100%. All right, so here's your policy stuff. This is things you need to know about policies. Here's what a policy might look like, and this comes from one of those document sites that I had there. But it's like, what's the title of policy? When is it starting? When is it going into effect? Oftentimes, and they don't have it here, but we'll have a change record for all the times it's been changed or updated. And you want to be touching your documents every 6 months at a minimum. In fact, most tooling like Archer and some of these other tools that deal with this, they will have like your documents kind of like grow cold over time, and then it'll start sending alerts to everybody, hey, you need to be updating this. Well, I'm private sector working for the government, so I get the best of both. The question was like, is government jobs like less pay? But I'm a contractor that works then for another contractor that then works for the government. So I don't get the gut punch for the pay. The question was, do you get paid less? Government employees tend to make a lot less than me though. Yeah, that's true. Because government employees are like a GS rating system, and I don't think this is gonna sound like super cocky, but or Chad as you guys say it nowadays. But no, like there's no GS rating for what I make. I don't think. I'm pretty sure. But that's true of a lot of like contractors have been doing this a long time. Look, then you put in your information here. So this is just a generic template, and then we would go modify it for us for whatever we're doing. All right, so that's a policy example. Again, don't start from a blank page. Start with something like this and then modify it for your company's needs. All right. RACI chart. So you're going to run into a bunch of different types of documents, but I'm just going to give you some examples that you're going to run into probably as an administrator, for sure as you get into engineering and project management and architecture and stuff. RACI charts are charts that deal with who the people are that are responsible for these different things. So this is like to help solve the problem in meetings where everyone sees the problem, but nobody wants to jump on it. There's also something I talk about too. If you've called a meeting, like if I've ever called a meeting for anything, I'm going to have an agenda. That's all there is to it because I don't want to waste anybody's time. But two, I'm always going to have notes and deliverables. And when it's done with the meeting, everybody that's there is going to know exactly what I expect from them by the next meeting or whatever. Now, this is weird for me because like I don't have any power in the organization. My authority is only what we call expert authority. That's all my authority's ever been in a company. I don't want somebody to have to listen to me. I want people to want to listen to me because I have the right answer. But anyways, here's what a RACI chart is. Now, people always hear this and then they glaze over and they don't think about it. I know glaze means something else, but we used to say glaze over like you just weren't paying attention. But now glaze means to like really like something. I don't know. It's weird. Language is always changing. But who's responsible? Who's the one doing the action? Who's accountable? So the person's the owner or manager or project manager, they're going to drive that responsible person into doing what they need to do. Who's consulted or who needs to be asked about it, even if they're not directly responsible. And then who's informed because they're going to be making sure that those things are good. This kind of seems kind of abstract, but I'm going to show you a chart here. So this is what a RACI chart might look like. So we wanted to draft some technical policies, or we had some new cybersecurity thing coming in, right? And what might happen is we've got to draft a policy around that wireless implementation. We were talking about wireless earlier, right? So somebody needs to draft a policy around what's going to happen for that. Well, who's responsible for that? Well, the security architect is, right? The security architect should be putting together, he knows the technology the best, he's the architect. He knows what policies are in place, what's higher up from the organization around, we need to adhere to these different policies. So he's going to be able to go and look at the technologies and say, okay, we need at least an 802.11x system. It needs to be back-ended to its own VLAN. It needs to have, this level of whatever we're going to do, right, for security. And he's going to draft the policy, so he's responsible. The DevOps lead and the compliance team might be consulted. They might be in some meetings where he says, hey, what do you guys think about this? Here's kind of what I'm doing. And the DevOps lead might say, you know what, that sounds really good, but that's going to challenge, we're going to have to make sure that those VLANs are accessible. So some of the networking teams are probably going to have to be involved because they're going to have to open up some routes and stuff between the VLANs. And okay, and then there's maybe who is... what was A? A is accountable, right? So who's accountable for that getting done is the project manager. They're the one that has to actually go and drive these people to getting it done. But at the end of the day, the security architect's responsible for it. He's the one that's going to do it. Now, the next part, after a policy's been written, who's going to actually do the technical implementation, right? Well, who's responsible for that? Well, the DevOps lead. He's the guy who's going to, and maybe this DevOps is kind of generic. Maybe that's like the, lead over the deployment team or something, right? He's responsible for it. The security architecture, he's going to definitely be consulted because there may be some questions or some looking at some docs and stuff. But then compliance team is going to be informed when it's ready, and the project manager is going to be informed when that's ready as well. He might also be kind of accountable for it as well, but we'll just say he's I. Then compliance and audit, they're going to come in later on that, and they're going to be responsible for auditing and making sure that that is the way that we said it was set up and that we're adhering to our policies, right, that were written. So they're going to be responsible. Informed is going to be your project manager and your DevOps lead, and the security architect may be consulted so that the compliance team, because look, guys, compliance people are not your deeply technical DevOps people and your deployment people. So they're over here saying, well, hey, how are we going to check that this system really does have a the certain type of AES encryption on it, like we said, and then it's actually, how are we going to check that? And the security architect might say, well, here's all the serial numbers and here's all the IP addresses that we know. Here's the architecture. You should be able to hit all of those systems. You have this tool to maybe query those and get reports back that those things are configured correctly. Cool. So compliance and audit, they're cool because now they can keep reporting that we are, this will be the governance, risk, and compliance GRC team. And they're, saying, hey, everything's good. And then maybe the final report is going to come out. Responsible is your project manager. He's responsible for it. And then everybody else is informed, and they've probably fed information up to him as well on that final report for the thing. So Hyper said, do I have any roadmaps for like Linux admins? Yeah, I actually have. I mean, we have free courses and stuff with our Discord, with the Professional Linux Users Group that shows you guys how to get into Linux. If you needed that really quickly, whoops, not that. That's different. Right here. This. Here is, in our Prolog, we have like a Linux systems administration. I think this is one of the minimum things that you need to know. Let's get that out of the way. I just linked it over there. I'll drop it on the YouTube side as well so you guys have it. But that's like our free book. We have 3 free books out there on Linux administration, security engineering with Linux, and then also automation with Linux. So that's kind of like I guess maybe that's not what you think of roadmap, but those are all the things you need to be in Linux, in the Linux space. All right, so anyways, here's RACI charts. And here's how they might work in a POAM. So a POAM is a plan of action and milestone. So we have either some deficiency in the system that we're trying to adhere or solve, or sometimes the plan of action and milestones are we want to get to some security standard. We want to get like a 27001, it's 27,000 standard, or a SOC 2 compliance or I want to be PCI DSS compliant. And then we would go and we would write up what the different things are that we wanted to do. So maybe in my example, project and the individual tasks, who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, right? That's that RACI chart. And then when is it scheduled to be completed versus when is it actually completed? So this only gets filled out when it's actually done. And then maybe our steps or remediation plan from a high level, maybe notes and stuff that we're looking into. And we may put together a plan of action and milestones for how we're going to drive our company from here over to here, or our IT team or our project or whatever, right? And back to that other thing, we could have taken this right here, this draft policy technical, all these things, and we could have put that into a plan of action and milestones, because obviously we had a difference between where we were and where we needed to get to. So your plan of actions and milestones can include your RACI chart right in it, and that's typically how we do it. But we talked about that RACI chart first so you guys would see it. But this is a way to do it. And then a lot of times we'll guess, right? SWAG, scientific wild ass guesses as to times and fixes. But the point is, now we can have something that comes up in a meeting and we can say, hey, you're responsible. What are you doing? And if somebody says, I haven't done anything, then you're like, all right, well, we're going to ask you tomorrow, right? And that's often a way that we drive things forward. There you go. Yeah, and then roadmap.sh. That's probably a good place. All right. So testing, how do we do testing? Well, testing is all tests, whatever type of test you're doing, and for whatever the concept is to record accurate information about the state of a system, right? We want to make sure that what we're getting is scoped down to what we're looking for. We want to collect it correctly and store it right. We want to aggregate it by times and different things like that in a reasonable way. And then we want to control that data collection so that it's not skewered in some way or incorrect, because honestly, when you deal with any type of metrics, when you deal with any type of thing you want to improve, if you don't properly test the data that you're pulling in, you can't improve that. Because you're not testing it correctly, you're not reading it correctly, your metrics are bad, everything goes bad. It's this garbage in, garbage out philosophy. If it's garbage up here, it's going to be garbage the whole way over. So what do we want to do? This is how I always put my tests together. We need a purpose. Why are we doing the test? Scope. How are we conducting it? What is being captured? What's out of scope is what's not captured. So you can slash those together if you want. What are we looking at? What are we not looking at? But also, if we're not looking at something, is there a reason why? Like if we're talking about disk IO, I may say with disk IO that I'm not super worried about whether or not, hold on a second here. Let me fix this. I think my captioning turned off. Maybe it's better. Okay, there we go. With my in scope and out of scope, I may squish those together and say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge that when I do disk IO, that I don't necessarily care about the draw of power to my system. That's not that interesting to me for this. But I might acknowledge that, yeah, the higher draw of systems when we spin up a big disk array is going to happen because we're using spinning disks and they're mechanical parts. So they do actually cause a higher load for a system that's spinning up all the spinning disks. However, I'm going to acknowledge that that's not that big of a deal, because as long as there's power, the system's going to run fine. It's not going to really affect disk IO. So that may be something I acknowledge or I know, right? And maybe you don't always acknowledge it because we all know it, but maybe we want to not capture that because like there's spikes in our environment, and maybe somebody's going to look at that and go, oh, I can correlate these pieces of data together, but they're maybe not really actually correlatable. So the point is, there's some things that are out of scope because we just don't want to capture them and they don't really matter to what we're specifically looking for. And then the methodology is your description of how we will work to objectively determine the quality of our outcomes. Are we using qualitative or quantitative results? So qualitative results always deal with like high, medium, and low, whereas quantitative results are, 75 degrees, 80 degrees, 95 degrees. So maybe low, medium, and high is represented as actual numbers, and quantitative results give us, in some cases, a much more clear picture than just like a high, medium, or low. But there's different reasons to look at different data different ways, right? And what normalization of points are we using? Are we always going to be dealing with percentages? Or are we dealing with a continuous scale like I just used, which is like Fahrenheit? Or some of you may be more used to centigrade, where you're dealing with some other centigrade or Celsius, right? Depending on what you're dealing with, there's different things you might deal with. And then control. What's going to be put in place to ensure that the collection is done against a similar environment between different tests? Now, controls are interesting because we don't always have full control over an environment. Sometimes we're in an environment where things change over time, and that's true of a multi-server environment. Things are always going to be different the next time you come in. But a lot of times we have to use this rule that comes from economics. It's a rule called ceteris paribus, right? Yeah, there it is. If you want to go write it down, ceteris paribus is all other things being held equal. We believe that treated environments, if they're similar, we can assume that the other things are equal if nothing else is actually shown to be different. So that's something to think about. But that's a thing that we tend to think about as engineers. And what might be different though within a control group is if I'm always looking at my servers on Monday morning when everybody comes in and checks out all their cat videos, yeah, I expect higher network usage on Monday morning than maybe Friday afternoon when half of the people have already clocked out for the day and aren't doing anything, right? So one thing we do is we try to time bound or load bound our tests so that, if I do something on a Friday afternoon, I might do the test again the next Friday afternoon, not on Monday morning where it's obviously going to be a higher load because obviously everybody wants to see their cat videos. All right, so testing outline. And then here's different types of testing. Here's my little penguin buddy. Some of you guys know I have a little Adobe Creative Cloud, so he's just making all kinds of stuff. So unit testing, test individual components, see if they work the way that we expect them to. All of these can be done in both a typically like a functional and non-functional way. Now, I know we do have functional testing, but I'll talk about that here in a second. But unit testing can be, does it check all the boxes? Those are functional checks, right? But unit testing is, does the thing take the inputs and give the outputs I expect? Cool. Integration testing, does it work with the other systems that are already in place? We planned that it would, but does it actually do those things, right? Functional testing is the idea that something checks boxes. So in this case, you push this and ICE comes out. So functional testing is, does it function the way that we expect it to? And then acceptance testing is typically just checking off the boxes to acceptance testing is a form of functional testing because what it's doing is it's checking off all the boxes that were already agreed to beforehand. If you ever do a project of any type, you get those deliverables ahead of time and you get them codified down and agreed by the users. And when the users come in, you sit down with them and you show them each thing and you may have to grab their hand and make them check it off. And when all 5 things on that list are checked off, they have to say they're done with the project. The project is done. Now we go into maintenance. And some people are like, Scott, that sounds like a real asshole thing to do. Sometimes you have to be, because I'm telling you, people will try to nitpick and change things over and over again. But once acceptance testing, and by the way, acceptance testing, you should have those deliverables agreed upon by your users well beforehand, or who's going to sign off for users. And when they come in and do user acceptance testing or government acceptance testing, they should check those boxes, and then they accept the system, it moves into whatever they need, and then now you're on the maintenance phase of your contract. If you're doing that, acceptance is very, very big deal with a lot of companies, because it's when the model changes from a lot of times we're fixed cost. We said we would build this thing for X amount of dollars. We need to get it built and accepted by you, and then now we're on maintenance money, where the more you guys need maintenance, the more you need help. That's where it's more of like a cost plus model often. So anyways, acceptance testing, good for that. Performance testing, does the system speed up and do the things that we need it to? I think that's funny. Load testing, does it handle the load? Load and stress testing are directly related to each other in that if you load a system up and it handles the load, it's a load test. If you break the system during a load test, the point at which the system failed to handle the load is a successful stress test. If you ever tried to do a stress test, if you tell me, hey, Scott, I'm going to go stress test your servers right now, I'm going to spin them all up, and I say, okay, do it, and you do it, and the system doesn't break, it handles all of that you just did, all you did was a load test. To successfully stress test the system, you must break a component. If you do not break a component or cause it to fail in some way, all you did was load test it. So that's where these are related. You can try to do stress tests for the rest of your career and never break a server, and all you ever did was a load test. And when a stress test breaks something and you capture what broke, that is your critical thing that you need to work on next, or whatever, right? What we call the next thing, yeah, the next thing to break. So anyways, look, he's got too many hammers. Regression testing, going back through and making sure that you work with all of your previous tests. Regression testing, that's often a software thing, but we do that with systems world. Sometimes regression tests are like, hey, make sure that it still adheres to all those previous policies, make sure it still passes all the other previous CVEs. We don't have any older versions of software out there. And a lot of times regression testing for us is built right into our like patch management stuff. Like we've moved forward from all that old software, that kind of stuff. We might have usability testing. I don't deal with this much because I don't deal with users nearly as much. But like if a user ever asks me how do I, it's just a delete button. That's not completely true. A Haxer, security testing, right? So we'll just sit there and bang on it. A/B testing, right? Figuring out which one is preferable. Again, I don't do a lot of this type of testing. And then field testing. This is often field testing and functional testing are at odds because functional testing is it checks all the boxes. Field testing is it works as it behaves, how it behaves in the wild. So this is often, field testing is often for us as engineers called non-functional testing, or what we call fit for warranty. Can I drive it around and pivot steer? Anybody here military where you pivot steer a vehicle? With tracks, you can just pivot on a spot. That's a test, right? That's a thing to make sure that the tracks aren't going to fall off. All right, so anyways, these are types of testing that you might run into. There's a whole bunch of them. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are ones that are kind of common. All right, security topics. So next to uptime, as an operational team, the most important security concept we're going to deal with in tech is the security of the system, right? So the most important, security is generally viewed across the lens of these three areas. And I mentioned these earlier, but confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the system. Those are always going to be the main focuses of a security team, right? So confidentiality, who can see the data? Integrity, who or what can change the data? And I say what because if you go put data somewhere and leave it for 3 years, and then you come back and entropy has caused bits to change and you don't have some kind of check in that file system or some kind of backup, it's very possible that you've lost data through no malicious action of people or processes. It's just the passage of time has degraded tape or has caused your disks to fail or something like that. And integrity is interesting because we have to have business impact analysis, business continuity plans, and then ways to get that data back, right? Availability is, does the system do it when we need it to? All right, so within that, there's a little bit of what we call risk, right? So people run these IT departments and then they hire us and they want us on. This whole talk that I'm doing right now is on breaking into tech, right? So risk management is part of why companies want to avoid risk as much as possible. Most companies stay far away from it. But risk is the potential of undesirable outcomes from any action you might do. And inaction can also cause risk as well. So we don't do anything. We just keep doing what we're doing. And next thing we know, the industry has moved past us and we're not providing something of value anymore, right? The motivation for taking risk is always the favorable outcome. As Mel Brooks said in the first Spaceballs movie, if you guys ever go back and watch it, they say, "Yogurt, will we ever see you again?" And he goes, "No, you won't see me again until Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money." He said that back in like the 80s or whenever Spaceballs came out, and then now they just made part 2. But the motivation for taking risk is the search for more money. So risk tolerance is how much of an undesirable outcome the risk taker is willing to accept in exchange for the potential benefit, right? And people all the time, man, like, you might think like, oh, I don't do any risk. If you get in a car and go drive around every day, and then you go look at like the statistics of people that crash every day, you realize there is a risk every time you get in a car. Every time you go out to get your little snacky snacks over at the store, there is always a risk that you might get in an accident. Now, most of us don't even think about it because it's such a low risk and it's an acceptable risk to us, but it is a risk. By the way, you say, oh, I'll ditch the car, I'll just go walk on the street. You don't think any of those guys have ever been clotheslined by a car? It's not great, but these things happen. So my point is, risk management in IT is the process of determining the acceptable level of risk, what we call the risk appetite or tolerance, and we can calculate our levels of risk with risk assessments. So risk assessments are very popular. There's a NIST standard 800-53 that deals with risk management in IT, right? The 800-53 is just the overall, I think, like IT systems operations, and then one of the substandards is risk management. But I'm going to show you that a little bit. But accepting the level of risk is acceptance, or taking steps to reduce the risk is risk mitigation. And there's different things we can do within mitigation to try to keep a risk from happening. So what do we do with risk? We can accept it and just be like, well, we make $10 million. We have a certain risk that, some of our fleet of cars are going to get run into every day, and we make $10 million. It's like UPS. They have a risk acceptance. They drive trucks all over the place. Their trucks get in accidents literally every day all over the US. And, well, they have to fix them. But is that an acceptable risk versus the money they're making? Well, we hope so. We know they are, because they're still around doing their stuff. But what can we do with risk mitigation? We can reduce the risk with countermeasures. We can keep our fleet of vehicles maintained. We can train our drivers. We can do all of these things. We can have rate limiters for how fast they can drive. We can make sure that they wear the proper equipment so they never pick up a box that weighs more than 80 pounds without possibly hurting themselves. There's all kinds of stuff that we can do, right? They can share the risk with another entity. They probably have insurance, either with an internal entity that they pay insurance to, or they may have a third-party insurance, and they share that risk with that entity. Or another way of sharing risk is they could have maybe independent drivers that drive to some rural areas where they don't want to have all of the trucks and that kind of stuff. So maybe they have some that kind of stuff. That's risk that they're sharing with somebody else. You can transfer the risk to another entity entirely, which is non-internal. That's insurance. You can modify or cease the risk-causing activity. So you can avoid certain areas. Like, there's companies that pull out of certain cities in the U.S. because operations there are no longer, it's too risky to run a shop in some parts of the U.S. It's interesting, but there are inner city parts of the U.S. that you can go look at the crime rates, and stores have went, nope, not going to do operations there anymore, and they've pulled out of there. And it's kind of an interesting thing. So risk reduction is accomplished by implementing one or more offensive or defensive controls to lower what we call residual risk. Residual risk is whatever's left over after you've taken your mitigations. Sorry, it's supposed to get to 111 here today. Jeez. Okay, so here's that NIST thing. So this comes from 800-30, which is another one of their docs, and it's a risk assessment methodology. Now, I tell people all the time, there's a whole bunch of these on the web. There's a whole bunch of ways to do this, but basically you prepare, you identify threat sources and events, get some vulnerabilities and conditions out of the way, determine the likelihood of occurrence, and there's all kinds of equations that we can use for that are very popular. Determine magnitude of impact, and then we can from that determine how much risk we have going forward. We tend to determine risk in this way through what we call a quantitative assessment. I'm going to show you guys quantitative assessments here in a minute. But then we communicate results out, and then we maintain the assessment and keep it going every 6 months or every year within our organization. We update this, or as we get new assets on, we update what's called a risk register. There are specialized tools that are out there in the industry that people will run. One that's very common is called Archer. It's very expensive though. There are open source tools that'll do this as well. I linked one in our Discord the other day, so if anybody wants that, let me know in there and I'll post it to you guys again. But there's open source tools that'll help you track this stuff in your teams if you need. So what is risk management? So IT risk management kind of looks like this. It's the application of normal risk management to our IT projects, right? So in order to manage the risks associated with us, we need to know these things. One of the most important things to do in IT in general, if you come into an operations team, right? And I was mentioning this a few hours ago now. We've been talking for over 3 hours. But a few hours ago, I was mentioning where you come on kind of on the operations team. And I just want you to think about this for a second. If nobody knows what all the assets are, if you can't go to some document or some place or some person in your company and say, hey, what are all of our IT assets? If nobody can tell you that, you guys, well, first off, you have no operations control of those things because you don't even know where they all are. But two, you definitely have no security of them. So I often use this example, and I know people think it's silly, but it's true. Who's the best cop ever? Clearly RoboCop, right? You guys all know who RoboCop is, right? He's a very violent comic from the 80s, and then he turned into a show, and this cop is all metal, and he can just shoot guns out of people's hands. He actually does it in one of the movies. Where I'm going with that is he can be the best cop ever, right? But if you drop him into a hospital, and that hospital has 7 floors, but he doesn't know that. And it's got 350 rooms, but he doesn't know that. And he doesn't have a layout of the rooms or the hospital or anything. How good is he going to be at protecting that hospital? I mean, I know that's silly, but let's say there's enough RoboCops to protect the whole hospital. They're going to be shit. They don't know how many floors they are. They don't even know if they're on all the floors. So I say, hey, report, how secure is the hospital? They're like, well, we've got 5 of these floors really well covered. And I'm like, there's 7 floors in the hospital. And they're like, we didn't know that. It's terrible, right? It's the same. So my point in that, it sounds silly, but if you can't identify all your assets, you have no operational control and no security of your system. So that's why this is the most important part. And you say, well, what's the second most important part? Well, you got to be able to identify threats, right? What's out there? What could be, what are we exposing to the world that people can reach in on, right? I would Some of you guys know I was the red team lead for a company. Nobody, when I was the red team lead for, basically I did all the red team operations against my company. It was a big insurance company in the US. Nobody could give me there was nobody in our organization that could give me a list of all of our web properties. That's wild to me. That's why nobody knew what all of our web domains or web properties were. Nobody. No one person in our company. I had to like build that list myself. And then we had so there was a team that was like my sister team. They were the application security team. And that manager had all of our application stuff. So he had all the domains of all our applications internally, but nobody had all of our web domain property, not one person. And I thought that was wild. That's to this day, that's still one of the craziest things I've seen in a company. But we didn't know all our assets. I had to go find them. I had to go dig and query stuff on the web and basically do reconnaissance of our own company to find everything. Then we identify threats, like what are we doing out there? Vulnerabilities are things that are inherent to our system. A lot of times we offload this to the community. There are the CVE, the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures databases that exist. NIST has one. Different companies publish them, but NIST is probably the most popular around the world. They publish a thing called the CVSS scores, and they score vulnerabilities against software that you're running and tools that you're using. And then now you have all these latent vulnerabilities with risk scores tied to them across all of the stuff you're using. You get a software bill of materials for a server, right? You take a server like this. This is a Linux box in my environment. And let's go like Rocky 5. And a software bill of materials is like this. This is all my stuff. How many we got 352 software packages about on there, and maybe we just look for all the SSH. So here's our OpenSSH client and server, and I can see that they're 9.9, and published against that 9.9 OpenSSH client or server, there are probably CVE lower vulnerabilities that have been found by the community and published up to the NIST database about this. In fact, we can probably go look at them. We do that in other talks that I do. But I just want to show you, like, here's my software bill of materials, right? There's all my software on the system. And then I could go assess the vulnerabilities against known vulnerability databases. Now, known vulnerability databases are great because as things come out, people are publishing them. Some researchers are finding vulnerabilities. There's all kinds of things happening, but there are also 0 days that could be happening. So I may want to protect myself in other ways. Now, there's also, there's all kinds of stuff here, like, and we talk about this in other talks, but there's layered defense models. So even if you could punch through my OpenSSH, you probably can't even get there unless you're connected in with a VPN, because most of my servers are back-ended. Most of my servers in the DMZ don't have SSH access. There's all kinds of things that are there, hopefully, to protect us. But we have to go in and we have to assess our vulnerabilities to what's going on in the system. Then we assess the risks. What are our risks that are left over after we've done these different things and made sure that things are safe? And then we start to mitigate those risks. Maybe we have vulnerability management plans where we patch servers every few months, every month maybe. We patch kernels every time there's a CVSS score of 7 or higher against them. And there's all kinds of things that we can do to mitigate risks. All web servers are always TLS terminated behind a web application firewall through a third party, and no other communication happens without that. Although there is a risk there because now we're beholden to that third party's uptime, and if they're ever down or their web application firewall ever stops responding, now we no longer have traffic to our normal stuff. But is that an acceptable, we've mitigated the risk, but we've also generated some more risk. There's all kinds of things that can happen here, right? And you can play that what if game forever. But the point is, at some point, you have to really go through these processes. And there are people who spend their whole career in that if you want to get into what we call the governance, risk, and compliance teams, GRC teams. And that's what they do. I don't do that stuff. I just patch the servers and keep them all running, right? But anyways, that calculating risk, real high level stuff. There's quantitative and qualitative analysis. Real quick, just looking at it, quantitative uses numbers, qualitative uses letters. But qualitative is also based on the expertise of the person doing it, whereas quantitative, you can have any low-level engineer in your company, as long as they have good, accurate information, should be able to do that. Anybody should be able to do a quantitative analysis. However, if they're getting garbage information in or not checking their data, they're going to get garbage information out. Qualitative is much more based on the subject matter expert and the expertise of the person that's doing it to say high, medium, or low, right? So something to think about. And you might say, which one do you tend to do when you're talking to like execs? The answer is both. Executives sometimes like this up in there, what we call like an executive summary at the top of the page. Sometimes you'll just be real quick, a little this, and it'll be color coded. So they just look at the red and they go, that's red, that's high. We gotta work on those viruses. But then later, as they dig down, or other people dig down into the report, they'll see that the quantitative risk shows where the actual costs are, right? And then you can start to play with that kind of stuff. Final deliverables for this section. So that was like the longest section I have, and that thing took over an hour. This is the things that I want you guys to know about working in a company. I think to get better at that, you should work on your documentation procedures. You should understand how to capture your work and turn it into meaningful processes that others can follow along with. That's something that you can actually go do. I think you should study more about IT operations, because I think you should understand how you go about dealing with risk and how organizations avoid risk. That's useful, because people are going to be asking you questions like that in an interview, even if they're not directly about risk management. If you can frame it in that way and say, hey, we patch systems and we have good documentations to minimize the risk of downtime in our system, because our major goal or key performance indicator is uptime. You say stuff like that, they're like, hey, this guy kind of knows what he's talking about. So I think you should read related blog posts about IT operations. And then there's a whole bunch of free books out there on site reliability engineering as well. So site reliability engineering is like the SRE Google books, stuff like that that's out there. All right. So then this next part, I think this is the fourth section, which is putting together a resume. So if you follow along with me so far, you started out with the first part of our talk was what do you want to do, right? What do you want to do in tech? Then learning that topic, so learning Linux in our case most of the time, or whatever else we're doing. And then this next one, the one that we just did, was learning about operations and operations things that are going to kind of happen. Why do companies have IT departments, and what do they do? I know this is a long talk. And then now we're in the putting together a resume. So I think this is section 4. Putting together a resume. Here's if you were going to pull up and do some AI stuff, if you're watching this later, you can pause it right here and just read the screen. But ask your AI. Again, there's a whole bunch of AI tools out there. Any of these things. What resume length is recommended? What should I lead with on my resume? What are some good template examples for resume, and where might I find them? And then should I customize a resume for each job application, right? So you'd go look that up, read through that, see if there's any interesting things out there for you. And again, go ahead and pause this if you're watching it later, because we're not going to stop for the 10 minutes and 10 minutes. In 2 weeks, when we do this down in the Discord, we're going to do this like a workshop, and people are going to have time. I'm actually going to put a timer up, and we're going to talk through it and stuff. So, all right. So what should be on your resume, right? Here's Linux Systems Administrator with the name Tux Penguin. What should we be putting on a resume? How should we be making our resume look? And what are we really doing? So I think you should find a template that works for you. There are some really good template examples out there on overleaf.com. Let me pull this up real quick. Overleaf is a free, actually it's an open source tool, but let me get this out of here. It's an open source tool that has a bunch of resumes and other stuff on it. And you could find a resume that looks good for you, and then you could use their free tools out here to use it. You can also run Overleaf in your own systems if you have Linux boxes, especially if you have Kubernetes. You can just run Overleaf in Kubernetes, and you could build and customize any of these resumes out for exactly what you wanted, okay? Now, I'm a big fan of only having a one-page resume, especially early on in your career. You're not going to have that much going on. Just getting a cert, not keeping it valid, prove anything. I mean, if you had a cert and then it's not still valid, I would still have the cert on the resume because you still passed it at one point. Like I didn't renew my CKA or my CKAD, and they're still on there for the version of Kubernetes that I got them for. So, but I do think you should have. I think a one-page resume is sufficient for most people, and I think it should be a minimum going back 10 years. But okay, as you get into your career, leave it back 10 years. But when you're first early on, you can go as far back as works for you. And what you need to do in here, and I kind of talk about this in the next slide, is you lead with your strength. If the strongest thing you've got is your experience, even though you're trying to get into tech, right? This whole talk is about getting into tech. If your experience is around working retail, that's fine, especially if you've been working at the same job for a few years. That kind of looks good. But if you've been working with technologies or focusing on getting certs or something, those may jump up to the top above experience because they matter more. So these are just the top. These are just the areas. So your experience, what have you done? What work? Where have you been? Education's very valid. What have you completed? Typically, if you have over like a 3 point, I think 3.8 is typically what people say. You can put that on your resume. I don't put down my resume. I don't put my GPA on anything, but I have 4.0 right now, but I don't put that down because I think that's silly. Any technologies or languages, proficiencies that you have in the Linux space, you want to put RHEL, SLES, the actual Ubuntu 2404, because they're actually looking for those words typically. Even and I'm going to talk about this here in a little bit. The filters are going to catch you if you're not putting things that they're looking for. So RHEL is a big one, RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, especially if that's what you've been working with. Then optional summary of a career, maybe certifications if you have them. But if certifications are for your industry, you might want to lead with those. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. And then if you belong to any professional organizations, you should put that down as well. All right. So lead with your strengths. This is actually a generic one that I have. Some of you guys have seen this before. This is published. This is on the Discord as a PDF if you guys need it. But this is the way that mine looks. This is actually the same version of mine. It's just been scraped down for generic jobs and that kind of stuff and phone numbers and stuff. But everything else on this is real for me. And this is just, I try to lead with my strengths. My summary of qualifications goes first. Things that I've done, and then I go with my experience. And then at the very bottom, after everything else, I have my schooling, my education. Education's not that important really for what I do. Being able to do the job is more important for what I do, right? Yeah, WG's used pretty good. I have probably 4 or 5 people at least in the Discord that have passed WGU. Some people have been working on that too. I think some people are still over there, but they're a pretty good organization. But your resume should look something like this, and it should look something like a clean format that you like. And you should also test it. Mine's in dark mode, but you should also flip it to white mode to make sure it looks good in that mode as well. I'm a big fan of the things I'm doing. So this is when I was still the infrastructure engineer 5 and platform engineering lead for my company. All of the things that I say, all of my action words are in. Actually, it's funny. So this is an older one. But let me correct something here for you guys. I always make my present one current action verbs. So deploy, interface with, develop. But this says developed because actually this is me cheesing it. This is an older version of my resume. I actually am in a different role now for a different company, but this was what I did for a long time. And I don't use past tense for my current role. I use past tense for all my older roles. So I actually have a different version of this that would show that. But the point is, whatever I'm doing or whatever I'm writing is typically action verbs of the exact things I do. I try to put down scores of like the actual things. So, I manage a team. Well, I wasn't a manager. I was the lead of a team of 9 people that did Linux, Windows, all the virtualization and hardware environments for the company. Right? We managed 5,000 servers in the Linux, Windows, Unix environment. We did have some Unix when I first started there, and then we got rid of it. And then I'm responsible for assigning team members work for projects. So projects would come up, and I'd put different people on there depending on how much they could handle it and all that stuff. But even before you get down to my experience, I have kind of like the things that I'm doing in the industry or things that I had done in the industry, that kind of stuff, right? So I have all that in there. And I say lead with your strongest focus because that's what people are going to start with, right? They're going to start up at the top. All right. So final deliverables for this section. I thought I had that in there. Yeah, maybe I don't have it in there, but final deliverables. I think you should have a template for your resume picked out. I think you should go, and again, it doesn't have to be right now, but you should have a plan to go find some version of a template. They're all over the internet. Just find a template, try to get it down to one page. And I think you should have a rough draft version of your resume populated, limited down to one page, especially if you're trying to break into tech. Just get it down to one page, get your things that you've been working on. Earlier in one of those sections, I showed you all of those free certs you can go do. Most of those free certs are attainable within a day or two, although I would tell you spend some time and really learn that stuff, because some of that stuff may really change the course of your kind of career trajectory, right? But then you can, but the point is you pass those certs, get those on your resume, and start putting out jobs. So here in a second, we're going to get into how we interview and then how we go look for the work. So those are the last two sections. So these sections are a little shorter, obviously. That's final deliverable for that. Now, you got to practice your interview skills. You got to be good at talking about this stuff. This is probably the hardest thing. Most of us that are good at getting into the systems, we are not good at talking about it. And most of the people I know that are really, really sharp and know this stuff, they don't have the confidence to talk about it to other people. So this is something we have to practice and build on. When we do the workshop in 2 weeks on the Discord, again, workshop's free, come hang out with us. I'm going to try to split us off into some different teams and some of the different channels. And I'll set like a timer for everybody, and then I'll drop down in the channels and bring them back. Where you can go and work with some of our other senior guys to actually talk through, because I have quite a few people in the server that have done interviews for people and tried to get other people in and talk through their skills and stuff. So they're going to hopefully give you some good pointers. But here's our fifth AI activity of the day. So we're in our fifth section. So you go grab your little AI or whatever you're using. I'm using Gemini from Google, and ask them about these different topics. Go down whatever rabbit holes for things you don't know. And then the thing is, what questions should I expect in a Linux, or again, if you're going to be security or networking or operations or risk management or GRC or whatever your team is, go look at what your questions are that you should expect. What's an elevator pitch? You need to know what an elevator pitch is. It's a quick 2 minutes about yourself, why you're the right person for the role. And then this next one is, what should I say about myself if I'm asked why I'm the right person for a job, Linux administrator? And your answer to that should be catered to what the job's asking for. And the jobs always ask for the same thing, guys. This is something that comes up here soon. But it's like, jobs are always wanting you to troubleshoot. They're always wanting you to monitor. They're always wanting you to have good documentation skills. They're always wanting you to have the ability to take over a ticket, and own the ticket until it's completed. And it's like, it's all these things that like are they're the same on all the different job postings, just for different companies. But all of the things are pretty much the same. What are some things that I should do to prepare for a tech interview with Linux, right? So let that little bot try to tell you some stuff you might do on top of what I've said. And then how long should I make my answers in an interview, right? We sometimes do our practice interviews in the Discord, which you guys are welcome to come and hang out and do those. And sometimes we'll ask people questions and they'll give us like the shortest answer, or they'll give me the shortest answer. I'll be like, I want to know more. Tell me a little more about it. So, and sometimes that comes from, just it's an interesting place. These things can come from a lot of different places. You really have to just evaluate yourself on it. But I'm going to show you the things that I think you should do to get better at some of these interviews. And for my background on this, I've given well over 350, probably approaching 400 total tech interviews over my lifetime now. They're always bringing me in to do the technical questions for people. So that's one of the things that I've done most of my career, as well as asking and sitting in interviews with people that are going through this. And this is difficult. This is a difficult process. All right. So there's two things that people want to know in an interview. When somebody's asking you questions, whatever they're doing, if you think they're trying to trip you up, if they're doing whatever, they want to know two things. Can you do the job, and will you do the job? Those are the only two things that really matter in that interview. And you are trying to convince them they are planning on handing over the reins of a working IT system to you, possibly overnight, possibly as part of a team during the day. But you need to give them the confidence that they should give you root in an environment, right? Like admin permissions in an environment. I might have to look that up, Hyper, the STAR interview method. I don't know what that is, but that may be actually really good. But you need to instill confidence to these people that you're the right person to keep this system operational. They're trying to put the mantle of admin or owner or monitor of this system overnight. They want to make sure that you're going to call people out. They're going to want to make sure that you're the right person for this. So two questions they're always having in their head when they're interviewing you: can you do the job? Sometimes we know that very quickly with people, but will you do the job? Sometimes that's a little harder to suss out from people. So what are they going to ask? What are the types of questions people are going to ask you? This is something to think about. So these are questions that people will ask you, and I just kind of spitballed these ones up. I might add more when we do the actual talk here, but they'll just ask you something like, tell me a little bit about yourself. And what do they want to know? They want to know your background summary. This is a really good place to have your elevator pitch ready, right? And how do you prepare for this question? This question almost always happens. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And it's like, hey, focus on your roles and strength. If you talk about accomplishment, use percent increases or numbers improvement. So they may want you to just say something like, hey, Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself. And for me, I would say, hey, I've been doing, Linux engineering for 25 years. I've been teaching it at the college level for the last 18. Most of the time when I'm on a team, I'm the tech lead. And what I end up doing is ensuring that our ability to deploy the systems is always functional. Our ability to monitor those systems is always within whatever KPIs we have aside from uptime. Ensure that we always have the proper, capacity going forward for the next 6 months is there. And then that we're adhering to all of our build procedures and background. So earlier I said, and I would probably have mentioned this earlier, I said that we can build everything correctly, but also that we're building it to whatever our cybersecurity standards are. And that may be that I just spitballed that. I haven't prepared mine in years, but that may be something I would do. And I would be talking about these specific things. Now, if I was saying, yeah, hey, when I was on this team, I worked with I had 9 other engineers under me, and we maintained a ticket count that had dropped by, 150%, and we maintained it at lower levels than it had ever been in the history of that team, or whatever. I don't know, something like that. We reduced the average wait time for resolution from 4 days to 3 days or something like that, right? And those kind of things may be something that, and I can give percentages for that, or I can give like a quantitative result from that. But that's just something that you might say in a little bit of a background about yourself. Now, they might ask you, why are you the right person for this role? Which is different than a little bit about yourself, because now they want to understand that you understand the role. They want to know that you know what they're asking for. So focus on what they're asking for. Does it lead with, hey, you're going to be monitoring systems and troubleshooting in a network operations center on Saturday nights, or, you're going to be working the third shift? Well, why are you the right person for the role? Well, I've worked third shift before. I was very successful. I tend to be the person who monitors the system and then updates documentation where I find it incorrect. And talk about the things that they're asking for. Like if they're asking for a late night third shift person, which I actually say this later on in the last section. If you're a junior and maybe you're younger and you don't have a family yet and you don't have kids and stuff, go take the third shift. You'll at least get on the team, right? And then later on, you can work on getting off the third shift, right? Third shift work sometimes sucks, guys. That's the overnight. That's like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 8 a.m. sometimes. That can be really crappy work, but it can get you in the industry, right? And that's good. So are you the right person for the role? You're basically regurgitating the role to them, but telling them where you can do the troubleshooting and the monitoring and the capacity planning and these other things that might be asked for in there. If they ask you any questions about technology, so, hey, what's your experience with RHEL 9, RHEL 10? They want to understand, they want to know if you understand how to deploy and troubleshoot. At the end of the day, that's really the two things they ask of engineers. Can you deploy things and can you troubleshoot them, right? Now, if you're going for a more junior role, like an operations type role, and you're just trying to get in, they may mostly focus on, do you understand how to troubleshoot it? But any question about technology, so they want you to know the technology, know how the industry uses it. So blog posts, frequently asked questions, pages about that tool, and know alternative technologies to compare it with too. So somebody may say, this role just mentioned Linux, but we operate as a completely RHEL shop, and you don't know that maybe even until you get in the interview. And your answer may be, hey, I don't use Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but I'm very proficient with Rocky Linux. I've been using Rocky. I know that it is a binary compatible alternative to RHEL, where you're not using Red Hat Linux. I've used that technology, and and then you can maybe break down an alternative that's very similar to it, or SLES, right? SLES is another tool that's used often in government, and maybe you didn't know it was going to be a Red Hat question, but then you're saying, well, I haven't used that directly, but I've used these other ones that are kind of similar to it, right? And then maybe you can break down some of that stuff. Now they're going to ask you about troubleshooting things. They're always, any operations team, they're going to ask you how you troubleshoot things. They're trying to see how well you think on your feet. Do you have a standard methodology to troubleshoot? Do you understand some tool in some way? So you should know your troubleshooting methodology. I didn't go deep into that now, but I have other talks where we do troubleshooting methodologies, where we try to get a problem statement. We try to figure out what is happening correctly and what is not happening, and we try to hypothesize what the actual thing is that we're going to fix. And then we go and we test our hypothesis and see if that's actually what is broken, and then we start to figure out our fix. And some of these things may be, you may want to point out, I always check the internal documentation. They love that because it's internal documentation. I always alert the maybe you actually are the network operations team because you're an operations person. So maybe it's, I only troubleshoot something late at night for 10 minutes. If I determine it's down, I immediately call out the on-call. That's a very valid tool as well, because it's not often, excuse me, when you're beginning in your operations career, you're not the one responsible for the uptime. Oftentimes you're the one responsible for calling out the person that is early on in your career. So one of the answers could be, hey, I'm going to check the things I do. I'm going to go through all the documentation that I have, and then I'm immediately going to escalate while I continue to check, right? Because that is oftentimes the real answer for a junior person, to call the person who built it, call the person who's done it, because that's what they're on call for. And as a kind of stepping back away from that, as a person who's done a lot of handing stuff off over my career, I need to build the shit so that you don't have to call me. And I need to document it so you don't have to call me. So if you're calling me, almost always, if I ever were mad getting called late at night, which I don't think I ever have been in my career, but if I did, I should be mad at myself because I'm the reason they called me. And I tell people that often when you ask me how good fit for warranty is, and fit for warranty is the function of how well your stuff works, I say you have to build it so that you can take a weekend. Because if you can't build it where they're not going to call you over the weekend, then you need to reassess how you build stuff, right? Anyways, all right, so that's what they're doing there. And then how do you handle X scenario? They may throw scenarios at you like, they just want to see how you handle pressure. So they may ask you, this is a very common one, and this is one I love to ask. Can you tell me about about a time when you've done everything correctly, but the project or task that you were on still failed? And people like that, I don't know why, because I normally always ask technical questions, but that question folds people. And I'm not trying to like gut punch people and mess them up. I'm telling you guys now, that question folds people. And what I mean by that is they don't have an answer. They're like, I've never failed, or I failed, but I don't want to tell them. And it causes some internal conundrums for some people. It's actually kind of funny. But they want to know how you handle pressure and how you handle defeat, even when you did everything right. And I've had people tell me about sports teams they were on where they were having the best game of their career, but they still lost. I don't know if any of you have ever watched sports. You could be playing the best baseball game of your career, and somebody on your team can have just two simple little errors, and it doesn't matter. You lost you lost the game, even though it was the best game of your career. And that's, I've heard people say that. But I think that this is something you should think about before you go in a technical interview, all of these questions, because they're probably coming. And this may be something like that's not that bad. It might just be, hey, can you tell me about a time you were on a project that failed or something? Hey, we did all the things that we could, and then we found after X amount of weeks of working on it that the customer was going to go a different direction. So we didn't end up doing that part of the project or whatever. And they just want to see if you've worked through something, how you learn to kind of internally frame things. They want to make sure that you're not just going to fold under pressure. A lot of these jobs, especially if they're going to be putting you on late at night, they want to make sure that if nothing else, you don't panic and you will call somebody out or you will do the prescribed thing. And obviously you can't, in the IT sense, you can't map out everything that can happen. It's impossible. It's like chess. Once you get like past 6 moves, there's literally billions of moves that could happen in that game. And it's not a, you guys know chess isn't a known set yet, right? Even with all the IT, even with all the, millions of hours of computation time thrown at it, chess isn't a known set yet. Whereas like Go and some of these other games are a known set. You start playing a computer and you make one wrong move and it'll always beat you, right? But chess isn't that way yet. Chess is probably getting close though, but it's not there yet. So anyway, so these are some of the most common interview questions. It's not exhaustive. You probably want to spend some time with your little AI bot or your study groups and that kind of stuff, which is again why we have industry discussion and groups where people can come and talk about this stuff. Final deliverables for this section. These are things that I think you should work on. I think you should have an elevator pitch about yourself. That's a 2-minute speech on why you're the person they should choose, because companies are going to ask you that kind of stuff. You should have a practice plan to talk through the topics you have learned in the other sections. So you should either have like a little group. And guys, everything in our Discord, you can go down in any of those study channels. You can go hang out there with other people if you want to plan times. If you need us to set up events, we can do that if you want. But you can go down there and talk through these topics with people and just see how well you know them, right? And just maybe vocalize them. And I'll tell you, if you're nervous talking in front of people, you have to do it in an interview. So you're not getting hired somewhere if you can't make through that process. So it's one of these things, I can either be scared about it and pull my sheets over my head, or I can kind of buck up and go do it, right? And those are our 2 options here. And then I think you should practice talking about the technology you work with so you feel comfortable about deploying it, talking about deploying it and troubleshooting it. Those are really the crux of things we do as engineers. We deploy things and implement technologies, and we troubleshoot those technologies. Those are 2 things we mainly do, main things we're called on, right? All right. So now applying for jobs. This is the last one, and there were some questions around this, and hopefully I answered them. But applying for jobs, this is our last AI activity. So if you were to pull up your little AI, right, or pause the video if you're watching this later, and go down and say, where should I look for entry-level IT jobs near me, right? You maybe put in where you're at if you want. What are some alternative job titles that still use Linux? There's a whole bunch of them. What are some career paths that involve Linux? Because maybe you haven't thought about all the ways that you can get into Linux. And then one of the last ones is, should I tailor my resume to each job posting? Now, in the last one, we had talked a little bit, before the last one, we talked a little bit about the putting together a resume. And I kind of alluded to the fact that I think you should be ready to tailor it. But I'm going to tell you, I do think you should tailor your job application and your resume to each thing, because the HR filters and the AI filters that are going to look at these things, they are not, I hate to say it like this, but they're just not that technical. They're the HR people for sure are not technical. They're just looking for keywords, and they're probably just going to automate it with an AI that's going to look for keywords. So if they say they want Red Hat Enterprise Linux, hopefully on your resume somewhere you have Red Hat or RHEL, RHEL is typically what we call it, and probably the versions that they're looking for. So RHEL 9, 10 nowadays, probably RHEL 8 would still get you in, but you should definitely have those on there, and that's RHEL. Yeah, RHEL. All right. There's no one place to find a job, right? Some people find it through networking, some people find it, but all the previous sections were about getting ready for where the work does come from. Now we must find the work, right? So there's all kinds of job sites. There's Dice.com, Monster, Jobbing, LinkedIn. Some of these places, like I keep hearing, oh, these people just post jobs and they're never hiring people. I personally know managers that are hiring people right now, so I know some hiring is going on, right? But obviously that's just my experience and my little area of control, but I can't, tell you everything. But typically these job sites, or these sites, have job postings that are useful to see what people are looking for. So you can go look for, hey, what are Linux admins asked to do? Well, they're always asked to troubleshoot. They're always asked to document stuff. They're always asked to look at monitoring. They're always asked to answer trouble tickets. Like those 4 things right off the top of my head are always there. Literally always there. I can open up a job site right now, type in Linux administrator, and I guarantee we would find those 4 things. Everybody wants that, right? So these are the things that we kind of have to know about, right? And then I say search local jobs, right? Find things that are local. If you're going for entry level to get into tech, school districts, they have a lot of IT in them. Local offices or governments can all have spots to work with troubleshooting and operating tech systems. Maybe you get in on a Windows job, but then eventually you hope to get over to Linux. I mean, breaking into tech, I think, is the most important part. And I'm also a big fan of going to second or third shift operations for network operations or security operations centers, right? That's what NOCs and SOCs are. Those activities are great for people who don't mind overnight. I can't work overnight. I did that in my 20s, and that's hard work, right? Like I didn't even know what day of the week it was sometimes. That's hard work for some people. I don't work well on a late shift like that. But early on in your career, that can be a way to get you in running those things late at night. So I don't think there's any one place to find a job. They're all over the place, but there are some commonalities between them that I think you should kind of get used to, right? They're always asking for some of the same stuff. All right. So what to search for? On your job search, look for keywords that you know about the topic, right? If you're talking Linux, it might be Linux operations, administrator, systems administrator. There's also roles that are similar, and that hopefully your AI finds some good ones in that AI activity. But what are some things that are similar to Linux, but a little different? So network operations and security operations, they do more monitoring and reporting than they do just straight Linux, but oftentimes you're still able to get in the systems and at least check them out. Sometimes you'll have like a normal user account. You might not be root right away. The goal is to get to root, right? That's the goal. We want to be the root admin. But the jobs often require Linux or security focused knowledge. So you can get into those roles even while you're focused on studying to get into a Linux admin role. And then for your next job, as you've done some of these NOC and SOC roles for a while, you're more prepared, and somebody's going to give you another shot, probably, well, we hope, because you've been running these other roles and you've been doing things that are similar, or like what we might call tech adjacent, right? Some people call it tech adjacent. I think this is in tech at that point. You're just maybe not in your dream Linux role yet. All right. Applying for the jobs, I do think you should cater your resume to each job posting. This ends up being a bit tedious, right? You got to take every one and keep a copy and probably name it for each of the different things that you post it for. But I'm telling you, I would rather. I have no scientific basis for what I'm saying here, but I think that this is very valid. I think that it would be better to put in 10 jobs with exactly like the words that they're asking for than just 10,000 bullshit resumes of your exact same resume. That's my own personal thing, because I'm telling you, they're using AI or a non-tech. If it ever even gets to a non-technical HR person, they're looking for the exact keywords, probably directly from an email from like the manager of that team. And if those keywords aren't on there, they're going to be like, hey, I got to get these 80 applications down to only 10 so that this guy can interview them. I mean, do you want that to be the reason you get kicked out of an interview process? I don't. And I've talked to so many people that they're like, I put out 3,000 resumes last year and I didn't get a single call back. And I'm like, man, I'll be honest. Unless you think you're retarded, I know you're not supposed to use that word, but unless you think that you've got a problem, it's probably your resume, right? Like, if you didn't get a single callback, I know that word offends people, but it's the proper engineering term. But if that's the thing that's going to get you, then maybe you need to go check the process out, because it's probably there's probably nothing wrong with you or your skills. There's probably something wrong with that resume. It's not getting you past all that stuff. So, anyways, applying for the job, very important. And then final deliverables for this last section is you should have a target set of jobs that you're actively searching in your local area, probably across those different things. And you should keep an eye on them for how long they're aging out, and if they're, popping them back up because maybe they've passed over you. Maybe you need to redo your resume and send it back in if they've popped back up, that kind of stuff. I do think you should have a plan to modify your resume for each job based on their focus or requirements. Make sure that you have at least like the minimum skills that they're looking for. And if you don't have those skills, you go back to one of those earlier things, readjust your plan to start being able to say that you have those skills. And then this is probably just me, but 5 to 10 jobs a week I would be submitting for on topics that you're actively working on. But I mean, some of you, like if you're really looking, if that's your full-time job is looking for work, I would be way higher than this. But I'm just saying, maybe if you're just floating stuff out there while you're working on something else and trying to get into tech, I'd say at least 5 to 10 jobs a week that you're just posting in for, because there's going to be that many new jobs each week anyways. So I think you should put those in. All right. So conclusion, right? What did we look at? As a reflection here, I've been talking for almost 4 hours now. This is about what our project in 2 weeks is going to look like for people that come to the workshop. Are you more prepared now than you were 4 hours ago to break into the tech field? Hopefully that answer is yes, or you have a plan. What can you do to continue to prepare to get into that role? And hopefully you have a lot of notes if you've went through all of this with me, and all those notes are all these things you should do. And then I'm going to tell you this, because this is one of the main criticisms I hear is, Scott, you keep making it sound like it's supposed to be easy. I'm not telling you this is easy. Everything right there should be challenging as hell. But if you want to move towards that path, you have to start doing something. So I'm giving you 6 areas to maybe try to improve in. And if not, then maybe that's not really what you want to do. And maybe that first one, in that first section, you were lying to yourself. Maybe you don't really want to do tech. Maybe you want to go do something else. And by the way, I think that would be a very valid outcome from watching something like this and going, you know what? No, screw that. I don't want all that stress. That guy made it sound terrible. There are all kinds of other job paths to go in. Maybe like that process management stuff. That's actually really good work. But I'm not telling anybody that this is going to be easy. There's been criticisms like, Scott, you make it sound like it's always, you should just get it. Nope. I think it's all challenging. It's all work, right? If this wasn't work, I would call this fun instead of work. But this is work, right? This isn't going to be easy. But you got to get in there. There's no one path into IT tech. One of my guys just messaged me yesterday in the Discord. He messaged me on a private message and said that, and he's been doing what he does like 20 something years. And he said he was in a meeting the other day, and they said, "Oh, we're just gonna give you root." They just gave him root for this thing. They're like, "You're the Linux guy for this project," and they just basically just bequeathed root admin access on him, even though he does other stuff in his career. But he's been doing so much Linux and setting so much stuff up that they're just like, "All right, you're the root guy now. You're root. You're admin." That's a weird way to break into tech in that context, but that's how he did it, right? And he's got his career. I think he's actually later in on his career, but he that's how he basically now can just say like, hey, I'm root like all the rest of you are, right? But there's no one way in. I just think that this drives you towards that goal. You guys seen that new game? There's a new game that just came out where you just like push ducks into a hole and then you just push cash registers. It's like this silly little game where you're just in like a warehouse and you're just like pushing stuff into this hole. I don't even know what the purpose of the game is except to do that. This is the idea that you're like pushing yourself towards that goal of dropping into tech. And you could just not push yourself towards that goal, but that's up to you, right? So that's our reflection. So then review. What did we talk about today? We did a self-assessment. Do we actually want to do this stuff, and what do we want to do? Then we talked about learning the technology and getting into like your body of knowledge and certifications. Even if you're not going to take the certification tests, how to study. Then your day-to-day in the tech field, which is a big old monster of a bunch of stuff that's going on. And then putting together a resume. What do I think a resume kind of looks like? What does the industry kind of look like? There's all kinds of templates out there. Practice your interviewing skills, your ability to present yourself. I often tell people the interview is the only place ever. This is the only place I know on all of planet Earth where you are allowed to actively brag about yourself. Maybe there may be some case made for like on a first date with somebody, but even then, if you brag too much, you sound bad. In an interview, you are asked to brag. Tell me about all the good things you've ever done, and most of us are fantastically bad at that because think about it. How often do you just walk up to somebody and start bragging about yourself? Never. But now you're trying to sell yourself to somebody to convince them that you can do the job and that you will do the job and that you're the person that's right to get the mantle of this company on your shoulders to keep these processes running forward that are making the company money. That's a skill to learn how to kind of sell yourself like that. And then you got to get out there and just start putting yourself in for jobs. And then you got to go do your interviews, and it's a process, right? I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but these are the 6 areas that I've kind of labeled this down to. All right. So where do you go from there? You stick to your plan. You've built a plan through all of this. You've hopefully taken notes and worked through some SMART goals, and you have like maybe a 3 or 6 month goal on what you're doing. We talked about that, I think, in section 2 and 3. So stick to your plan, what you want to do. Adjust the plan with new information, right? If the industry completely flips over and Linux is no longer used, you probably don't want to be a Linux engineer anymore. You probably want to go do something else, but adjust the plan and keep doing the things you're doing to get ready to get into tech. Then find other people that are working on the same things as you and talk to them about these topics, right? We've got a professional Linux user group you can hang out with. There's other places that you can go and hang out, and there's all kinds of people out there who in various degrees want to sell you things or want to give you free advice. And I say, find the one that resonates with you and works. Find your little group. Like people talk about finding their tribe. Find your little tribe of people that are doing these same things as you and go do this stuff. Right? And I really do think you can get into this. Is it going to be easy? No, but if you're driven and you move towards it, I think you can do it. Okay. Questions? Message me in the Discord. Discord is on Twitch, it's !Discord. Over on YouTube, it's down in the discussion. And I think, man, I'm right under 4 hours for this. I'm going to call it there. All right. I appreciate you guys coming by. That is my full stream, I think, for today. So I will go ahead and pull that up and say thank you guys for coming. We'll raid somebody over on the Twitch side. On the YouTube side, we're just going to stop it here.